everyone, welcome to the bonus podcast. I'm Gemma.
I'm Michael.
And today we're talking about the second half of the 90s.
At last.
On Coronation Street. 1995 to 1999.
We have finally reached the Millennium in our DVD and otherwise acquired episodes of YouTube and other media. I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm sounding really dodgy with this.
We've got the DVDs, so you can buy those. They're 80 episodes per decade.
Yes.
And we have watched those, and we've also watched some additional episodes that were available to us for various important plot points that we can understand what was going on.
We've watched loads.
So
that's one of the reasons why it's been taking so long, because it was back in February, I think, that we did the first half of the 90s. And back last year, we were getting through them at quite a pace, weren't we? It was like every 7, 8, 9 weeks, maybe, we'd have a new sort of 5-year slots to discuss. But this has certainly been our longest one yet, where we're going from 1995 to 1999, and there's an awful lot to discuss. I mean, back in the olden days, well, last year, we were only watching the DVD ones, weren't we? So it was literally like 8 episodes a year, and now it's double that sometimes, so it's taking longer. But there's higher episode counts. There's where we are at the moment, there's 4 episodes a week going on, and although we're not even coming close to watching all of them by any means, like months can go past, can't they, without some episodes, we're feeling that there's more key episodes that we have to see. So I hope this is worth the wait. And it's been funny because during the time that this has been, we've been kind of preparing for this, the ITV3 episodes have been caught up with and overtaken by us. So some of you who are watching along with ITV3 at the moment will recognise some of what we talk about in today's episode, and there will be some spoilers for what's coming up over the next year or so as well.
So we're recording this at the end of June.
Yes.
And I don't know where you are. Where do you think you are in?
We're like October maybe. Yeah,
October of what year, darling?
1998. Sorry. So there's about a year's worth extra. Yeah, we're at, even though we were releasing this episode probably kind of mid-ish July, we're recording it end of June because we've just finished watching the last episode that we wanted to watch in 1999, and we thought we'd get it out while it's still fresh in our heads. Because even like going back to some of the stuff in 1995, just reading through the notes, it did feel like a long time ago since we watched it, didn't it? Like, oh God, Raquel was still in it back in the beginning of this era. It's crazy.
I say this almost every single time we record a bit about Coronation Street in a 5-year instalment, but feels like things changed quite a lot.
This, to me, felt like by far the biggest shift. If you compare what Coronation Street was like at the end of 1999 to how it was at the beginning of 1995, it really was.
At the end of 1990, you said at the end of 1999?
Compared to the beginning of 1995,
okay, right.
It really felt like a different show.
Yep, there's a load more new characters, there's a load of characters that have gone.
Yeah.
It definitely feels like this was a transitional period.
It was. I mean, people talk about the Brian Park era being a gear shift for Coronation Street. Some may say for the better, some may say for the worse. But it really, really was, wasn't it?
Well, we don't have a crystal ball to say whether or not the show would have continued had Brian Park not act some of the characters. But it's quite telling to say that the characters he did act had a radical impact on the sort of stories that they could tell on Coronation Street and what kind of people they were telling stories about. And
it's not just the characters as well, is it? It's the tone of the show. Yeah. And again, I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said many times before by other commentators.
Certainly not
but
coming to this.
Coronation Street was certainly a lot gentler, a lot more kind of, well, a lot less sensational.
A lot less sexy.
Yeah, it was a lot less sexy, wasn't it? It's probably been sex stuff. It's a bit... Yeah.
You can see why Thelma Barlow.
Thelma Barlow.
Complained, and also
Gina Alexander as well.
Did not like.
No.
Quite a few of the people who had left or had been axed in this time have not a lot of good things to say about Coronation Street.
Yeah,
from
Bill
this
Waddington
time onwards.
Definitely. It just feels a lot. It sounds so cliche, a lot darker. by the time we reach 99, doesn't it? And some of it I've liked and some of it I haven't. I mean, 1997, I would have to say, out of these 5 years that we're talking about today, was by far my favourite year of the lot. And that was, peak Brian Park, wasn't it? Who's the producer that came in. I think he maybe started working for the show late 96, but his first episodes kind of showed up early 97. And by the end of 97, even then, it was a very different show. And a lot of his decisions, like you said, gave way to the Coronation Street that we now know Coronation Street to be, because it almost doesn't feel like a classic Coronation Street anymore, does it? It just feels like, now Coronation Street, but with different characters.
Yeah.
And some of those characters still being utter legacy classic characters.
Yeah.
Because you still got your Mikes, your Duckworths, your Almas, and all that, but
there's still people in it that are in it today. Like you've got Steve, Audrey, Gail. I'm trying to think of Sarah Louise.
We've just only just seen the introduction
Leanne,
of new
Toya.
Sarah Louise. Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Battersbys coming in were a huge talking point that I'm sure we'll get to chatting about soon.
I think I feel very nostalgic for the 90s in general, because
that was our era, wasn't it?
That was our era, but also it was a time of unbridled optimism and sort of self-congratulatory culture, where 9/11 changed everything for everybody. We became a much more cynical and dark society after that happened. But before then, I really do think that everybody was a lot more optimistic and really happy. We were leading up to the Millennium. We didn't know what the new era was going to bring, but everyone was excited about the future. I don't think anyone is anymore. I think that's over with now. Everyone's just very pessimistic about everything. I wouldn't say, though, that Coronation Street embodied any of that for me. Watching these episodes, I didn't feel any of that sort of,
There was, you could still sense the build up to the Millennium.
Oh, definitely,
in
but
stories.
only in the last year. But that's fair enough, because, I mean, the Millennium was definitely an obsession of our culture for a good 10 years before it happened.
Yeah.
For sure. And I remember, even as a child, thinking, when the Millennium is
How old am I going to be?
I'll be 18 and I'll be starting my adult life, or what magical things will be at my fingertips. And I remember watching a Tomorrow's World episode where they were making out that we'd have household robots and flying cars. And I was like, well, Tomorrow's World said it would happen, so I'm just waiting. I haven't got very long to get this done, though.
I was just watching a series of YouTube videos this morning about what we said in 2000 life in 2020 would be like.
Really?
And that's quite interesting as well. I won't go into it now, but it is futurology and all that.
Futurology is one of my favourite things, to look back and see what we used to think the world would be like in different eras. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about.
They definitely
The
captured
90s.
the excitement for the Millennium, and they're just now, as we've just been watching, they've been building up to a party. The most tragic bit about the Millennium in Coronation Street, though, for me, was the fact that Alf Roberts wasn't able to make it to it, because as the councillor, he was like Mr. Millennium, wasn't he? And he was the one behind all of Weatherfield's plans for this is what we're going to do to celebrate the year 2000, and the Millennium Bowl on the Red Wreck, when they had all that digging up and the stuff with Spider and his protesters and everything. And sadly, Alf was killed off just a year before the Millennium, wasn't it? It was like 1st of January 99 he was killed off, and then Brian Moseley himself died like 6 weeks later.
Yeah.
So that was really tragic, but
because the Millennium Bowl is obviously a riff on the Millennium Dome, which was one of our. Was this the beginning? I mean, Britain's always been a bit of a slightly naff place, hasn't it?
What?
Since the end of the Empire, darling, we've been a bit on a slow decline, and I think that the screwing up of the Millennium Dome was really the first time I think we all publicly acknowledged everything was slightly more crap than we ever realised it was. I don't know.
At least it was built unlike the Weatherfield Bowl.
The 80s was full of like people wanting to be yuppies and hating yuppies for being yuppies, and the 90s was full of like, oh, what's it going to be like in the Millennium? And then since we hit the year 2000, we've just been going, oh, yeah, this is how it is, isn't it?
Such pessimist.
It's not going to get any better than this.
I think the other reason you said you were talking about the 90s being our era, particularly the late 90s, and that was like, when I got Sky TV for the first time and pop culture was rammed down my throat.
Britpop was you know, the global sensation, wasn't it? Being British was actually cool.
Yeah, and it was funny seeing. Again, we've talked about the fashion through the era through a lot of these discussions that we've had, but there was certainly a lot of crazy, colourful blouses and shirts and things that the characters were wearing at this time, weren't there?
Well, yeah, I mean...
And Greg Kelly and his loud ties stood out to me. Lots of, like the wallpaper, all that, like it had all come out of changing rooms. Like Carol Smiley had been around everywhere, hadn't they? And like rag rolled everything. And...
yeah, changing rooms. I mean, 97 was when Austin Powers came out, and you've got the Spice Girls.
There's been an awful lot of Spice Girls in the background in these episodes of Corrie. When when Ken fell through the ceiling on top of Leanne and Nick, they were snogging away to Two Become One.
Yeah,
I enjoyed that. I have to say, and Leanne doing a Jerry Halliwell impression in the factory as well.
And you've got, you know, kind of mid-90s was like Oasis and Blur. So you've got alternate like Britpop, Brit rock or whatever you want to call it, and also proper pop. Like Take That, Spice Girls, kind of putting Britain on the global stage, and everyone was a bit more confident about what it meant. You know, if you look back at old episodes of Corrie, they're really focusing on recovering after the Second World War and building up industry and focusing on jobs and the working class. Whereas, I don't know, everything's a bit more nebulous and confusing in the 90s, but we had that kind of cultural aspect to focus on, didn't we?
Yeah.
And then we get to the Millennium and it's all downhill from there. Funnily enough, in the episodes that we saw, nobody was talking about the bug, Millennium bug.
No, I don't know whether that got mentioned in Coronation Street or not.
Which is really weird, because in my house we were my mum was very obsessed with this idea that there was going to be some kind of apocalyptic disaster where you'd have to make sure you had your emergency rations and your water. Although I just want to say one thing.
What?
The fact that people make fun of like people worrying about the Millennium Bug, but actually what happened was people identified the issue and then they fixed it.
Yeah.
And everyone thinks that it was a waste of time to worry about it, but actually it wasn't, because people actually fixed the problem. Whereas what we do now is worry about it and don't do anything to stop it from happening. And then when it happens, we're like, oh, I knew this would happen.
Well, we reacted quite well to COVID, I have to say, as a global population.
I really
could have been worse.
Think that people are going to agree with you on that front.
But when we were talking about the New Year's Eve there as well, we haven't actually seen New Year's Eve Weatherfield, have we? Because I think there was an episode that was broadcast on the 31st of December 99, but it was fairly throwaway. The big Millennium Party episode was shown on the 1st of January 2000. So the next one that we see is going to be the big Millennium episode. And then also Raquel coming back.
Raquel's back! That's your quote.
That is my, yeah. I only watched that a couple of years ago now, so I'm interested to see what you think of that. And both of those, I think, are hour-long episodes, which we've seen more of in the late 90s. In fact, I think it was probably 95 where we had the first ever hour-long episode of Coronation Street, and it's kind of caught us off guard a little bit watching, hasn't it? Like, oh, this is an hour-long one.
Yes, we didn't really used to have that, I don't think.
No.
And also the spin-off episodes.
Oh yeah, this is the era of the VHS spin-off, didn't we? Well, the first two of them at least. So we saw what was the first one? The QE2 episode, which again that's on the Curly and Raquel topic, which we'll come to later. That wasn't so good, I didn't think. And then but I'd seen that once or twice before. And then there was a Viva Las Vegas one, which I'd never seen before, and that was all right, really, wasn't it? I think which had Jack and Vera going to Las Vegas, Maxine and Fiona there as well, and Ray Langton showing up, of course, not doing his best performance ever, Neville Buswell. But no, that was an all right episode. Yeah,
I mean, I don't know. Was the night? I don't really remember. It's really difficult for me to recall because I was born in 82, so for most of the 80s I was just unconscious, and then the 90s was when I was a little girl, so I was from the age of 8 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So I'm not really that... I can't really remember in context too much, but I do think that sort of in the mid-90s was when pretty much everybody had a VHS player, recorder, and I do remember coveting the ones that had a double-decker VHS things, and you could record one and play another one. So almost everybody had something to watch additional media at home by this point in time. So them doing these specials make sense. And in the mid sort of, I think that in DVDs were like only invented in like 1995 or 1996 or something like that. So everybody knew that at this point this home media stuff was here to stay. So that's why they kind of branched out into these VHS specials, because the audience was there to purchase and watch them.
Although I remember there was a massive fuss caused by this first one at the time, the QE2 one, because it was like a VHS only, but they ended up showing it on TV. I can't remember, it might have even been the next year, like a few months later, and everybody complained when they bought it and they thought they had this exclusive content. But I don't think they did that with Viva Las Vegas. As talking of other kind of spin-offs as well, we also had, although I didn't actually watch any of the Corrie After Hours, which was the 1999 series of episodes that were shown at like 9 or 10 p.m. 5 nights in a row, and that was where Steve and Vikram went down to Brighton, then across to Calais, and we had the return of Bet and Vicky and Reg, I think. We still could watch some of that. We might go back and see it at some point, but it didn't feature on our schedule, did it? We had racing through to the end of the year.
If you're not from the UK, you probably don't know anything about this, but booze cruises are what Brits would do. I don't know if you can do it anymore now because of us leaving the EU, but basically there was no tax to pay on alcohol and cigarettes that you bought in France. And it's very easy to get to France quite quickly from anywhere on the south coast, especially in Kent, because it's very, very short trip across there. We can go from Portsmouth or where's the other place? Poole. Takes a bit longer, but yeah, basically Brits would just go across and just buy copious amounts. There was no limit to what you could buy.
Yeah, so having Steve and Vikram going over there and being a bit naughty about it, then that fit really, very much with the
it's for
mood of the
personal
time.
Consumption only. You're not supposed to sell it on. And also, I was going to say, the thing about the after hours thing, this was shown on TV, but this was not the first time, obviously, the Coronation Street had done spin-off shows, because they had a couple of...
of course. The Brothers Grimm?
No,
that's the thing I was... What was it called?
Brothers something or other. And also,
I don't remember Pardon the Expression, which was the Leonard Swindley one.
There were a couple of spin-off shows, but that was very early on in there.
Yeah. So they kind of came back to the idea of it, and it's not been seen much since, apart from the odd online spin-off, but even those have kind of petered out in recent years, haven't they? So this was an era of Coronation Street when I first...
Brothers McGregor.
Thank you very much. This was the era of Coronation Street when I definitely first started watching it, and I know I said that back in the last one because I couldn't remember exactly, like, did I start watching in 93, 94? I can't remember. I know there were some things in 94 that I vaguely remember happening, but 1995, absolutely, by that point, I was a converted Coronation Street fan. I remember when I started to go to secondary school in September of 1995, and I remember asking people whether they watched Coronation Street, which is just how you make friends, you know, when you're a 13-year-old boy.
Is it how you make friends?
Yeah.
How successful were you?
Well, I got Mark as a friend, so that's one, I suppose.
When was the last time you spoke to Mark?
Oh, it was a few years. Right. But yeah, so I definitely had seen this before, and I probably missed the odd episode here and there, but it was still, especially everything after the ITV3 episodes, felt kind of new to me, and I don't know whether that meant that some of it had been forgettable, or whether it was just the fact that it has been 20 years since I'd watched it before. But that was an unusual experience, you know, watching things that I knew I had seen before, but it didn't really... just didn't really remember it, and you're going to get the same thing in a couple of years' time because you started watching in late 2001, so we're not too far away to catching up to your era as well.
Yep.
I think before we get on to chatting about some of the characters and stories in more detail, I think we need to point out as well the another reason that we're a little bit late with this discussion is that we had a bit of a breather from it midway through 1996, didn't we? And this, do you want to talk a bit about that? Because I think it was you that instigated this.
Oh, I just got fed up with it. I don't really know what else you want me to say. I just couldn't be doing with it. It kind of got a bit boring, and I just felt like every single day my spare time was Coronation Street based, which is not how It's not living my best life, I'm just going to say.
It was also when I had that time
because
off school, didn't I? Because we had lockdown again, so like we'd watch a classic Coronation Street during lunchtime, and it felt like a bit of a slog. And
Well, just
1996 was a bit of a dull year as well. Actually,
I don't mind watching Corrie. You know, obviously I like watching Corrie. That's why we do this show. But you can have too much of a good thing, and I really don't like. You know, any TV show I wouldn't be able to watch every single day, hours a day.
No. So
I think you just. I kept saying, and another thing that happened, which happens quite often in our relationship, I will say to you, I'm having a bit much of it. I'm getting a bit fed up with this. I can't really cope with this. And that, to me, is me saying to you, this is the end of the line, we must stop now. And that, to you just hear me saying, I'm feeling a bit fed up with this. And you're thinking, well, you know, she's probably got another good 3 or 4 weeks of this. But no, I mean, stop immediately or I will have a mental breakdown.
So we did. We paused our Corrie watching for a month, didn't we? And I was very good, and I didn't mention it.
Yeah, what do you mean?
And then we kind of, once we got back to like, I don't remember when it was, April time, we picked up the pace back again, and then went through the second half of the 90s. But
it's being forced to do something. I'm not really for that.
That's fair
when
enough.
I feel like something is an obligation rather than a pleasure is when I start to find it a bit much.
Yeah, well, as we've been talking about with the ITV Hub episodes and Corrie kind of just making us watch it in a certain way.
But to be honest, that break was really good, and when I got back when we started watching it again, I have enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed watching all the new characters coming in. And
well, yeah. So character-wise, I think one other thing that I would say characterises this era is the turnover of characters, and we complain now about, you know, too many people on the cast and everything, but this was the beginning of the era, I would say, where they got rid of quite a lot of the old guard, as it were, and then brought in only a handful of new characters that really lasted. But there was a heck of a lot of characters that came in, stayed around for, you know, between 6 months and 2 years maybe, and then went and just kind of were forgotten, lost to Corrie
history. I believe that this was the beginning of Coronation Street recruiting characters for storyline purposes.
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
very, very used to that happening on Coronation Street quite regularly. So think about characters like, say, Becky, who came in, and she looked like she might be a regular character, but no, actually, she's only really there to talk, you know, to be involved in, Amy's story and all, you know.
I thought you were talking about Vicky McDonald. Yeah, she was in it for a bit longer. Yeah, Vicky Jeffries.
Yeah,
recently.
and for example,
even like Harvey at the moment.
Harvey,
Rent a Villain.
Yeah, or say, who's the one that's dead in the woods?
Rick Neelan.
Rick Neelan, for example. I don't think Corrie did that so much. You know, the only person I can really think of in original classic Corrie was like Dave Smith, who was the villainous
you
gangster.
had your Dave Smith, your Charlie Moffat, even like Esther Hayes at the beginning was a fairly bland character.
I know, but at Coronation Street now, it is not unusual for you to have in your mind, okay, here's the main cast and here's the people that are just in it for a bit. And it's sometimes that you kind of, you know, graduate somebody from one list to the other. So, for example, Gemma, when she came in, she was Callum's mole, and she was just his little side piece, kind of sidekick villain. And then she graduated from that side of the cast list to the permanent cast list. Another example, Henry. Now, I would love Henry to have joined the main cast list, but it's obvious to me that he was just, you know, on the other side, on the side of, I'm only here for a particular story. And Coronation Street, I really do not think, did that with any regularity until the mid-90s.
Yeah, exactly, because I've got a list of new minor characters that have appeared in Corrie in the past 5 years that we've been watching, and it's massive, isn't it? And so many of these, like, you look back and go, you can almost say, who are they, or what did they actually do? So people like Claire and Becky Palmer. So Claire was somebody who went out with Des for a year or so, and then they had that storyline about her having to give up the army pension because of her husband that copped it. Dull, and completely unmemorable, really. You've also got your hunk of the year, people like Chris Collins, for example. How long was he in it? A couple of years, maybe. Not left a major impression at all. Tony Horrocks, and then also same with some of the ladies that have shown up, like what was Natalie's niece, Lorraine? Is she still in at the moment? I don't know, but some of these characters are just coming in and not making an impression whatsoever.
Zoe Tattersall, she made a big impression, but she was only in there to for a couple of storylines. John Lindsay obviously was only in there for the Deirdre goes to prison storyline.
Yeah.
Jez Quigley, he's just arrived in the show. He's there to be an evil drugs lord.
Yeah, and he's going to go in with less than 50 episodes under his belt.
And Malone felt to me like they introduced her because they thought they needed. I don't really know what they introduced.
She was a funny one because she came in for a little bit in the early part of this era and was kind of going out with Andy for a bit. Then she developed a bit of a crush on Curly. Then she disappeared off for a couple of years and then came back just to be a bit of an evil psycho and have a slightly comedic ending. Yeah,
literally, that's her main purpose was one big story, and I don't know. I can't say for one way or the other whether this was deliberate, whether these characters were only there for a specific storyline, or if they were introduced because they genuinely thought that they would stick around for a longer time and have more of a turn.
Yeah, I
really don't know.
We've also seen Sally's been going through her men, hasn't she? I mean, I mentioned Chris Collins earlier, and that ties into the affair, which I'm sure we'll talk more about later on. But we've also seen her bedding. She's going out with Danny Hargreaves at the moment. She ends up opening the hardware store, though that hasn't happened yet. Again, completely forgettable character. We've got Vinnie Sorrell turn up, who fancies Natalie. There was a load of flipping Geordies on the show in the late 90s, weren't there? I remarked on the other day. Alan McKenna, who goes out with Fiona for a bit. Josie Clark, who goes out with Don. Quite a few of them are just these temporary partners that show up, and it feels like they could be major characters, but then they just, like you say, disappear and get forgotten about forever.
Whether it was there a lack of long-term planning? Was this deliberate? I don't know. But what I will say is that watching the second half of the 90s, to me, was fairly disorientating and even more confusing than the other ones have been. And I think every single time we've done these sort of chats about 5 years worth of Coronation Street, since probably, I don't know, the mid-70s, I've been going, I don't really know. I'm following kind of what's happening, but it feels like I'm sort of peeping through, holes in the fence and catching glimpses of what's going on and not really following it. And the fact that there are so many new characters is not very helpful. Now, obviously, those minor characters we just mentioned just sort of came and went, and I wouldn't begrudge anyone who didn't remember most of those people, but that this half of the decade also did bring in some very, very memorable characters, many of whom are still probably famous with Coronation Street watchers, if not even still in the show now.
Well, can we talk Battersbys?
Of course we can.
Because,
I love to talk.
I mean, if we talk about the second half of the 90s and the rejuvenation that the show had at the hand of Brian Park, the Battersbys were front and centre of that, weren't they? Definitely. How did you find that with them coming in? Because you must have known that they were coming.
Yeah, of course I did. Obviously, the Battersbys were incredibly infamous and notorious when they originally appeared in the show.
And hated.
I know that's what I'm getting at. Everybody hated them. Well, the majority opinion was people didn't like them. They felt very disruptive. They were... to me, I thought it was a bit strange that people threw their arms up about this, because...
There's probably some people that threw up as well.
Probably. They felt to me like the modern day version of the Ogdens. So I can imagine Coronation Street introducing them as Ogdens, because the Ogdens were also lower class sort of louts who people would look down on. I think that's what happened with the Battersbys, but there was also this period of time I do remember, like Neighbours from Hell, that kind of idea of people moving in next to you who are antisocial behaviours on the rise. I don't really know whether there was a cultural thing that happened. I don't know if there were... I guess this was around the time when people were buying council houses as well. I don't know what's going on culturally to say that this was a time when people were anxious about
I think
chaps.
you're right to make the comparison to the Ogdens, but I don't remember the Ogdens being quite so in your face or quite so despised by the neighbours.
Yeah, I do
when
not
we
know
watched
what
it.
the reaction of people, contemporaries at the time, to the Ogdens being introduced in the show was. Were they as shocked as people seem to have been about the Battersbys arriving? I don't know, but I do know that the sort of social consciousness of people, you know, these kind of people, they kind of blipped on the radar, and you know, and it's difficult also for us to really differentiate between what was society as a whole sort of coming to the awareness of a sort of group or culture or theme or issues based storyline, or us suddenly becoming of an age where we become more aware of these things happening.
I don't know.
So, you know, when we're watching these in real life, we're in our early teens, aren't we? In real life, Michael and Gemma are, you know, 13 or whatever, coming up to 18 during this time. So this is the sort of time when you start to become more aware of the sort of world around you as a whole.
See,
I don't know. It's a difficult thing for me to make a judgment call on, because always you're going to be affected by who you were and how old you were and what you were doing in a certain era when you're looking back at history, if you're alive at the time.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Park had a vision with the Battersbys, and he certainly followed through. He wanted them to kick up a fuss. He wanted people to kick up a fuss about them. He wanted them to make a stir. He wanted to make them as obnoxiously awful as possible, didn't they? I mean, they come in, you know, Toya and Leanna graffitiing the picture of Alma in fresh clothes. They steal the shopping trolley. They nick the power tool out of Bill's van. Toya does. Then over the next few episodes, you have Les nutting Curly after Curly wants the music turned down. There's literally like a group of residents that have a meeting together about how are we going to get rid of these awful Battersbys.
See, because I think that it was very deliberate that Coronation Street, and look, before I get into this, I don't want to offend anybody, and I don't know, you know, I'm speaking about this from a family. I lived on a Coronation Street. I lived on an estate when I was a kid. With my family, I was raised on a council estate, so I don't feel like I'm out of turn to talk about this, but I think that they made a big deal about the fact that they were renting this house as social housing. So in the UK, when we say social housing, we mean people are being housed by the council. So the council would find you somewhere to live, and generally it would have been on a council estate. So everybody was in the same sort of position on a council estate, where you sort of similar income to everybody else, and what the things that come with having a low income group of people, unfortunately, sometimes is crime, drugs, alcohol abuse, all the things that you would stereotype. Unfortunately, it's stereotyped for a reason, and I know because I lived that as a kid, you know, drugs, antisocial behaviour, people breaking in.
You did it all, didn't you?
All of it. I was the kingpin. Anyway, but on Coronation Street, there's this kind of, and I've talked about this before, this myth that it's about working class people, but most of the people on the street own their own home, or they own a business, or they can go for great stretches of time without having a job, without really having any problems. All of the things that come with being a working class person, all those stresses and strains of not having an income, or all the troubles, are really just only plot points when Coronation Street want them to be. They're not an overarching, depressing reality like they would be if you really were genuinely, properly working class. So the Battersbys moving in as sort of the council's moving into a council house, that was kind of causing a stir, wasn't it, amongst the residents, because they were all slightly higher status, because they are, you know, privately renting or own their own homes, a lot of them.
We'd seen shades of the lower class in Coronation Street in the preceding years, with like the Mallets moving in 95, I'm going to say, and I think Judy and Gary were just a little bit lower class-wise than the others
I mean,
nearby.
even if you think about the Duckworths, they took over from the Ogdens, and then they sort of fell on their feet a little bit and ended up owning the business and moving into the Rovers and everything. But there's always been somebody on the street. I think it's been a permanent thing that there's always someone who's the bottom of the ladder. And now it's Chesney and Gemma.
Yeah. Trisha Armstrong and Jamie were around this time as well, weren't they? We
Yeah.
talked about that recently.
And if you think about current day Sharon, she's coming from the perspective of somebody who would have been in that situation, but she's kind of got turned to a life of crime to elevate herself and dig her way out of whatever poverty she got left in when it all went wrong with Ian or whatever happened. But you see what I'm saying? Like, I think that this was the modern day version of what has always happened on Coronation Street with the families that I've just mentioned, but it was the 90s version. And I do not know whether there was something going on with people from council estates being homed in different areas, because I know these days when you have a new development you have to have a certain amount of social housing to try to sort of make people mix more, because the segregation stuff, it's can cause conflict as well as what happened here, which is forcing people together who aren't necessarily want to live in the same way, because the Battersbys come in and they are raving and partying and throwing things out of windows and shouting and stealing, and it's the worst stereotype you can imagine of what it's like to live on a council estate.
Toyah and Leanne really came in, the worst of the worst, the scummiest of the chavs.
Well, I can tell you,
but they didn't last long.
I can tell you that people get a lot worse than that on council estates.
Oh yeah, for
just
sure.
So you know.
But but when they came in, I think the Battersbys had to make a bit of a splash, but I think it seems like they were quickly toned down a little bit, or at least some of them were.
Well,
Les, I would say, is still just as bad as he was before, always on the scrounge and everything. And Janice was never... She always seemed to want to better herself and get out of it, but always Les was dragging her down.
Yeah,
and there's been some lovely scenes where she's been like, Les, I don't want this. I want us to not be like this.
One of the most memorable ones was the recent one we saw where Les gets caught out for going on the dole so that's unemployment. At the same time as also working, and he was getting 50 quid a week or something on the dole while also pocketing his money.
Yeah.
And nobody knew about this apart from him, and then he gets caught, and Janice sat down with him and they were having dinner together, and she was just in tears saying, it's not just the fact that he lied to her, but also that she never saw a penny of this money, and it all just got wasted on alcohol and betting and cigarettes, and she's there scrounging away trying to earn an honest living and providing for her family, which includes him, even though it shouldn't do, because he's supposed to also be an adult of working age, bringing money in for the family.
Yeah, although Janice was trying to be honest and everything, I did enjoy like some of the beginning scenes where she wasn't quite so much like that. One of my favourite ones was when was it Bill comes round because of finding out that Toyah had nicked his power drill, and Les and Scylla are both there trying to pretend that Toyah is like a kleptomaniac, and they're like, she's got a problem, she's going through counselling and everything, and they completely pull the wool over Bill's eyes, and then when he kind of agrees to let the matter drop, and when he leaves they both burst out laughing. They really were funny, the Battersbys. I absolutely love them.
It's like there's an anxiety about the depiction of like working class people where you want to give them agency and a bit of power sometimes. So the Ogdens had the same thing, where sometimes they'd be the butt of the joke and sometimes they'd be the one who triumphed. But very, very rarely in the Ogdens' case would that ever happen. Same with the Duckworth.
Yeah, definitely. The Toyah and Leanne, though, they've seen the biggest change over the few years, haven't they? Leanne has that story where she gets married to Nick. I thought that was kind of fun. And Gail's long-term prejudice of the Battersbys, that's where it all began, wasn't it?
That's the origin story.
Yeah, this 25-year-long hatred or distrust that Gail has of that family and Leanne in particular.
And there's a really neat scene that I think kind of epitomises the difference between how Leanne was brought up compared to Nick, because Nick is still the apple of Gail's eye, like the prized golden child of the family, who's been coddled his whole life. And I have to tell you, what's the actor's name?
Adam Rickett.
Adam Rickett's Nick is the biggest drip of all time.
He's you get the characters that are a little bit boring, a bit rubbish, but he goes beyond this, doesn't he? He is such a massive drippy wet blanket. Is Adam Rickett's Nick.
And somehow he falls in with Leanne, and there's a scene where they elope, and Leanne appears outside of a shop wearing this beautiful, very 90s slinky white wedding dress.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, how'd you like it? And he's like, oh, it's great. And she goes, oh, I nicked it. And he's like, oh, no, you can't steal things. That's bad. And she doesn't get why he's so upset about it. And he's like, he doesn't go, well, seeing as what you've nicked it, let's just get out of there. He's like literally on the doorstep of the shop where she's stolen this from. He's lecturing her about how it's wrong to steal things.
Mm. And then she said, oh, no, not really. And he beats her as well.
He's such a drip.
That was really fascinating, rewatching the beginnings of that relationship, knowing where it'd go over the next 25
and
years.
Watching the current predicament that they're in. I refuse, for my own mental health, to acknowledge that Adam Rickett Nick and Ben Bryce Nick are the same Nick. They just can't be.
I know.
They are really. But
I did think that the Adam Rickett Nick wasn't worlds away from Warren Jackson Nick. Actually,
I know, but talk about moaning about recasting Todd. Gareth Pierce is, if you're going to talk about Adam Rickett versus Nick Price and Gareth Pierce versus Bruno Langley. Bruno Langley might as well. Adam Rickett might as well be an alien from Mars for all Nick Price is anything
Ben
like.
Price.
Oh, shut up, then.
No, I know what you mean. It was.
I'm doing pretty well remembering all these names.
You are. You're doing a good job. Considering we've got so many to go through. No, they were hilarious. And and both Nick, I'm forgetting names now. Leanne and Toya both get very, very much more mellowed over those 5 years or 3 years, I suppose, don't they? We've just watched the run up to the Millennium, and already Leanne's got the classic, current Leanne hairstyle, for example. She really is kind of.
One thing I want to say though is that I think Toya was hammered down into being a bit more mousy, much faster than Leanne was, because we're watching. So we're in 99 at the moment. You've got Leanne hanging out with Jez Quigley, taking cocaine and ruining everybody's parties and going to raves, and you've got Toya going to the shop with Spider, buying cauliflowers and throwing sultanas in a fit, and being lectured for bruising the fruit by Spider.
Toya was a real. I think like Les would say, oh, she was thick. And everything, but she comes out of it. It's the end of 97 when Spider comes into the show, and he was such a turning point in Toya's character that takes the edge off her. Not in a bad way necessarily, as entertaining as she was, seeing her hanging outside the cabin and smoking and everything.
It really was very rapid.
I really did enjoy her infatuation with Spider, putting the antifreeze on the Norwegian prawns.
Well, let's just talk quickly about. Because that really is its own separate plot. Like, Spider turns up during this time.
You were never a fan of Spider, were you? Have you grown to like him? Because I really like him.
To be frank.
Why?
Because he talks like a dimwit.
That's rude.
He does.
I can't remember how long he was in the show, 5 years or so, maybe.
So he turns up. He's nephew Jeffrey.
Yeah,
of Emily Nugent. Emily, whatever she is.
Bishop.
He turns up unannounced. He spends the whole time sort of lazing around with jumpers covered in holes.
I refuse
to believe he ever bought a new jumper in his life. Nobody wears jumpers long enough for them to get that many holes when he's that young. I'm like 38 and I don't have holy jumpers.
It's all the crawling through tunnels that he's been doing. How much of that you've been doing recently?
He turns up and he's all, he's a hippie, and this was like the golden era. Apart from obviously the 60s, this was like the resurgence of the modern hippie and like new age stuff, and it
was the swampy,
and
eco warriors,
exactly. So he's one of those, and he turns up and he recruits. Is this time or did this already happen?
What?
The Red Wreck and everything.
It was this Christmas. It was very soon after he arrived. That was when Alf Roberts was planning to have built the Millennium Dome, the Millennium Bowl on the Red Wreck, and they have it all. They start digging it up. Emily climbs up a tree because Spider finds out that the hairy groundwater is growing there.
So basically, this was parallel to a very famous real person in the UK. It's called Swampy, and Spider was like that kind of, a mold of that character, and so he was doing all this, and he was also vegetarian. And this was a very impressionable time in Toya's life, where she was a young teen girl, sort of blossoming into her sexuality, fixates on Spider.
And he's not interested. He's completely oblivious.
At the beginning, he's not interested at all, and she just has this schoolgirl crush. But eventually, when they have the eclipse, they go to the Red Wreck to watch it in a tent, and that's when
they don't see much eclipse.
Toya becomes a woman. And after that, that's when they start hanging around, that they start dating properly. And really, I would say that Spider's influence on Toya is still in the show now, because I really think that her very lefty kind of vegetarian, let everybody do what they want kind of hippie streak that she has really goes all the way back to this period of her life.
Yeah.
Whereas Leanne doesn't really shake this really rebellious kind of streak that she's got, that was instilled in her by being a Battersby. And the whole thing of the Battersbys was it's us versus the world. And I don't think Leanne really... She had a very brief period very recently, where she's been like that. But up until that point, she's been like that the whole time.
Yeah, I think it was becoming a mum to Simon later on that it was a bit of a turning point for Leanne. But yeah, Toya, it was Spider that started, changing her, but also we got to see her wanting to better herself, and she wrote the articles for the magazine, which this has just been on ITV3 at the moment, and she has her English, she has her English lessons with Ken and everything. She starts to resent her family, which is when she goes running off to see her real dad in London, which we watched 2 episodes of, didn't we? Again, horrific. That's just recently aired on ITV3. Why was that horrific?
When she runs off to see her dad and she gets the wrong man and nearly gets raped in the woods.
Oh yeah, that's pretty bad.
That's pretty bad, isn't remember. It? Was it?
I was really surprised how much of a main character Toya is, and it just goes to show where you got the Baileys now in Coronation Street, who've been in the programme for 2 years now, which was a similar amount of time as the Battersbys have been on the show. Because if they come in mid 97, we're now late 99, so 2.5 years of Battersbys we've had. Just look how much of an influence they've had on the street,
completely integrated.
How they've got their roots everywhere, whereas the Baileys are just so insular.
I cannot imagine everybody sitting around in the Rovers having a chat and Aggie's just there saying, yeah, this is what I think, and everyone's saying, yeah Aggie, you're right, or shut up Aggie, nobody cares what you think. Like, literally, they are their own thing.
Yeah, the Battersbys are a real lesson in how to make a big impression, make a splash with a new family, and just get them everywhere.
Yeah.
And it feels like they totally belong.
And even though people were resentful of it, I don't know how long that lasted.
No.
And it just goes to show you about when you sort of look at Corrie now and the press that gets generated from some things that happen and stories that are controversial perhaps, and things that people kick off about on social media. And you think, in 6 months' time, are people going to still be harping on about this, or will they have moved on and accepted, whatever's happened, and not really be going on about it? How many people were still mad about the Battersbys at the end of 1999?
Yeah, I wonder.
Not very many.
Probably not. No. Okay, so I think that'll do with our Battersby discussion. I've really, really enjoyed them. I
think they were great.
I enjoyed the Mallets, the proto Battersbys. Although they didn't feel quite as integrated, did they?
The Mallets really felt to me like they were from the 70s.
Oh, how come?
And I mostly think it's down to...
Oh, Ian Mercer's hairstyle. Gary's.
He really did look like he was from a hippie band.
I really enjoyed them, but the fact that there was just 2 of them, yeah, it just felt that though they're having their own thing. And across the 3-4 years that we've seen of them, the story has been they want to really have a baby, and then they can't have a baby, and then they kind of adopt this Zoe Tattersall, who played by Joe Froggatt, off the street in a way.
And Joe Froggatt is what's her face out of the...
Yeah, she's the maid off of Downton, isn't
Downton
she?
Abbey.
And actually, that part of the story where Zoe has the baby and Judy and Gary kind of they buy the baby off of her and then Zoe steals it away. That was heartbreaking. There was Gaynor Faye, who plays Judy, did such fantastic performances of the showing the utter heartbreak of not being able to have a baby and just being so close to thinking that she had the perfect life and then having it torn away from her. I really, really enjoyed that. But then, and then the other memorable scene for me there was when baby Shannon ends up dying.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, 98 maybe?
That was from meningitis, wasn't it?
Yeah, and because Zoe's such a terrible mum, she kind of takes the baby back. She realises she wants her, but doesn't know how to look after her, or doesn't particularly care to look after her. Goes off clubbing.
She was involved in drugs and a cult and...
Yeah. I think the cult came afterwards, which we didn't see very much of, did we?
I'm really disappointed in this cult thing, because I was really bigging this up in my head.
Yeah, it just didn't appear on our...
I just saw probably one episode where it was mentioned, and that was it.
We saw them go to the cult house once, didn't we? And that had Ben Gorman's character and everyone having a bit of a hippie swaying time in there. But yeah, that story sadly passed us by. But it'll be on ITV3 again in the next 6 months.
I just don't think that British people do cults very well. I think that Americans are much better at joining cults than English people. I mean, I know we've got our Scientology, the headquarters here, wherever what's-his-face bought that giant mansion or whatever it was. I just think we're just too embarrassed to really throw ourselves into being in a cult.
I suppose, we're just, as always is the case with these 5-year discussions, we're just sparking off in different directions all the time. The other thing that I think stands out in this era of Coronation Street is the era of the beginning of the silly story. I would say the cult was a bit of a silly story. I would say that the gnome story, where Arthur the gnome gets kidnapped from Mavis and Derek and then sends them postcards and then has his ear sent through the post, and it turns out that it's Norris that's doing it all along. That's a silly story.
Capers.
For capers, for me, old Corrie capers used to be, in this episode, the Ogdens are going to get themselves into this mischief, this sort of, trouble or whatever, and then it's all solved by the end of the episode. This is maybe the time when it lasted a lot longer. You had what other silly stories were there from this era?
Well,
even things like Jack's hypnotism.
Oh, Lusty Jack.
Jack Johnson.
Right, so explain what that is.
So this was a story from 98, I'm going to say, where Vera was trying to get Jack to give up smoking and he refused to, and Alec was there trying to convince him to carry on smoking. He has a bet with Jack, doesn't he?
I don't know why he was so...
He was
obsessed with him smoking.
Oh, I think it was partly because Vera was trying to turn the Rovers into a non-smoking pub, and Alec didn't want anything to do with that. So anyway, Jack agrees to get hypnotised to try and not smoke anymore, and that was one of my favourite of recent episodes. The actual hypnotism scene. He goes to see this woman who lies him down on a couch, and she's like, "Oh, just imagine all the things that you like, and in one of those corners is smoking. Now, imagine taking that and screwing it up." And I can't remember it. She just does a really hilarious long scene of her telling him instructions, and Jack, who's pretending to be under hypnotism, going along with it, and he reaches out and screws a bit of paper up, and he sets a pile of cigarettes on the table alight, and he pretends to regress into this 500 years old version of himself. Which is fair enough, and that was funny for one episode, and that's the sort of thing that, as I say, maybe the Ogdens would have had that little caper in the 70s or the 80s, but having just watched this again on ITV3 as well, they keep this story up for a good 2 or 3 weeks.
They really, really do.
Lots of characters kind of believe him. Vera absolutely believes that he has regressed back into this past life, and I think Natalie and Betty are maybe a little bit wary, but they don't completely disbelieve, and it's just kind of taken as read that, Jack's had something gone wrong with him in this hypnotherapy session, and he's kind of trapped in this body. That was, to me, was Corrie kind of jumping the shark to the extreme. And a lot of people point out the gnome story as Corrie as silliest, but I think that this possibly is. Then you got your Anne Malone as well in the freezer. That was kind of played for laughs, wasn't it?
I didn't know what to think. I really didn't know what to think.
So we hadn't seen a whole lot of Anne, but when we came back to her in late 1998, she's just there scheming away, trying to get rid of Curly from Freshgos as some kind of revenge for him spurning her 2 years previously. and she goes around. She turns off the CCTV in the freezer, then goes like tampering with something inside the freezer, and then Trevor, the security guard, locks her in, and she's there banging on the door going, Trevor, Trevor, and then the next episode starts with them finding this frozen corpse of Anne, and really that should be horrific, but it was... Nobody really seemed to care, did they?
Nobody gave two hoots.
Like, the news spreads over the course of the next episode that Anne Malone's dead and she's been frozen in the freezer, and then people are just like, oh well. Yeah. So, yeah, anyway, odd Coronation Street stories definitely characterise this era for me. What were we even talking about? The Mallets? Maybe I'm over with that. But, Judy's death. That was sad.
It was
that was really tragic, because that was the same episode as Maxine and Ashley's wedding, which, watching it back, I think for me was probably one of my favourite Corrie weddings, just in terms of, isn't this romantic, isn't this lovely? Fred there is the really proud father/uncle, because this comes in the wake of Ashley finding out that Fred is actually his dad and not his uncle, and Fred being there so proud was lovely, and then Ashley's actual mum turning up. It was a really, really nice wedding. And then whilst Gary's there doing his best man speech at the end of the episode, you see Judy going out, pegging out her washing, and then passing out. And it was so terribly sad.
It was so sad when he finds out, because who's the character? Based in East Welsh.
Oh, Natalie, yeah.
Natalie goes to the wedding and says, you need to come home because Judy's been in an accident, and she doesn't say that he's dead.
No, she's dead.
She makes him come. Yeah, she makes him come back. She tells
Jim,
and Jim's like, oh dear. She brings him home. He gets to the house, and he's like, "Where's Judy?" And Ken's there going, "Didn't you tell him?" And Natalie says, "Oh, I couldn't bring myself to say it." And so Ken has to say, "Oh, I'm really sorry. Judy's dead." And then he runs through into the back garden, does Gary, and cradles Judy's corpse in his arms. And the doctor's there going, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry, that was nothing we can do." And he's like, "No." And then the whole episode ends with cobbles, with rain-soaked cobbles and silence.
No
that's
theme
how
music.
You can tell what the show expects the viewers to react like. So Judy's death sort of takes place over a couple of episodes, more than a couple, because it was a double episode with the wedding.
Yeah.
And then we also have the aftermath after that episode.
Yeah, you have Gary's brother Shane turning up for a bit,
don't you?
And
him sort of struggling with the twins.
Everyone trying to sympathise and help, but he doesn't want it.
Nobody gave two hoots about old freezer lady.
Yeah.
There was no, poignant ending for her. Nobody was sort of juggling with working out how to do the rota now that they're one woman down. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that was really well done. I did enjoy that. Did you like the Mallets? Because it feels to me
they
that
felt forgettable. They felt really... I mean, I really, really like Gaynor Faye. I think she's fantastic.
I think when you look at the other forgettable families of Coronation Street, because absolutely they're in there, and I think that they have been forgotten about. But if you compare them to the likes of the Harrises, the Mortons, the Claytons even, I think the Mallets are my favourite of the quickly in and out and then lost to the mist of time Corrie families.
They were fairly memorable for people that
Gaynor
were in
Faye
it for such a short amount of time. She's fantastic.
Yeah, it's just a shame that they didn't have many stories aside from the need to have a baby.
But the one thing that was really sad was baby Shannon dying.
That was
heart-wrenching.
Heart-breaking, gut-wrenching.
It was Leanne and Nick were supposed to be looking after baby Shannon.
Oh gosh, yeah, and it's Leanne that finds the dead baby, isn't it?
She goes up and finds this poor baby who had died of meningitis, and she's shrieking, going, "What?
She's been sick everywhere, Nick. What do we do? Get Martin."
And it was just this. It was sort of one of these mundane tragedies where these are real, I know they're not real people, but these were real people reacting. Not like you would in your mind if I was in that situation, I would do this, that and the other thing. They were helpless. They didn't know what to do. They were running around. They weren't being uselessly pathetic and annoyingly incompetent, but they just didn't know what the right thing to do was. And honestly, in that situation, the same as when Judy died, there was nothing to do. It's just a tragedy. Humans die sometimes out of nowhere, and this poor baby who you would think had, got 80 years left of life is lifeless in the crib, and these two sort of teenage children left thinking that they could, were mature enough to handle the situation, falling to pieces, just like anyone of any age might have done if they'd come across something like that.
It was really well done.
And just holding this dead baby in their arms.
Yeah.
And I can't remember who came in.
Well, I thought it was then Zoe turns up because she's been out clubbing, and Ashley hangs around with her.
Yeah, and it's like, well, what do you say?
Yeah.
On your watch, this baby has died, and it might not have been your fault. I have to say, props to Nick and Leanne for completely, putting that behind them, not giving that a second thought. It wasn't their fault, but, you'd expect them to dwell on it a little bit.
Especially Leanne, what she's been going through with Ollie recently.
I know, you'd think that she would have flashbacks.
Yeah.
I mean,
but, she hasn't had flashbacks to the drugs either, has she? No. I think she's wiped the pre-millennium period for her.
She's got a very mentally healthy attitude to all of the setbacks she's had in her past. Put them behind you, can't change it, move on with your life.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
I mean, I don't know whether there were any scenes dedicated to them overcoming or talking about their trauma. I said the same thing when we watched the 60s episodes, when Irma seemed to get over David's death remarkably quickly, but, I know now, looking back on it and reading up, that she was a bit messed up about it for a while, because it was her baby and her husband that died in a horrible car crash.
Yeah.
And from the episodes that you watch on the box set, it seems like one minute she's, a bit down, and the next minute she's off down the club pretending to be French. It's not quite how it happened.
What else should we... Let's talk more tragedy. Let's get all the tragedies out of the way, Gemma. Or the darkness, because this is what late 90s Corrie was. Another dark scene that stands out to me was that bit where Jim drags Liz out of the car after that army reunion back in 96, maybe I'm going to say, and then beats her up.
Really bad.
And that was another infamous scene that you hadn't seen before this, was it? Wasn't
this at a petrol station in the snow?
It was a snowy scene, yeah. I can't remember. It might have been at a petrol station. Yeah,
it's just really interesting to watch the different ways that people handled stories like this in different eras, and I don't want to be judgmental about it, because I think that the significance of different things is impressed upon you with cultural consciousness about what these things really should mean. So when we've watched Coronation Street start off where domestic abuse of a man against his wife was just comedic. You'd have Stan threatening to beat the living daylights out of Hilda because she made him think he'd won the lottery or whatever, and you're supposed to go, the Ogdens, what a pair of characters they are.
Well, doesn't Stan, isn't that his advice to David when he marries Irma or something? Like, just belt her one.
Belt around her face if she ever talks back to you or something.
And
it was just like, that's just how it was, or it was funny, I don't know. And then we're moving forward into the 90s, where still by no means is this taken that seriously, but it certainly wasn't. It was very harrowing to watch, and you were supposed to sympathise with Liz, and you knew that Jim was being a horrible, evil man. But the difference being now is, if you had this scene, this would be the end of Jim as a character. You'd never be able to sympathise with him again. They would never say anything nice. And nothing good would ever happen to Jim again on the show. Whereas this was depicted as Jim just losing his temper with Liz, and then he moves on, and perhaps she forgives him, etc., or whatever. They get divorced. But the show doesn't hold a grudge against. This is what I'm trying to say. The show doesn't hold a grudge against Jim for doing this. It just felt like, although we sympathised with the situation and we felt sorry for Liz, and this was a terrible thing that Jim did, this didn't define Jim as a character in the same way that it would do now. So if you take, for example, Jeff, once he started abusing Yasmin, there was no redemption of his character. Perhaps they would depict him as jovial and liked and friendly, but that would only be as a juxtaposition between that and what he's actually really like. Do you see what I'm saying? Like this wasn't what Jim is really like because he beats Liz up. This was just another facet of his character.
It was all very much in character though, and what we get instead of the, get rid of Jim is seeing him going through that and then going to his lowest ebb.
Yeah.
Charlie Lawson did some amazing performances in this
You'd
era.
never get this now. You'd never get Jim beating Liz up and then us sympathising with him as he deals with his being disabled and being in a wheelchair.
They have them split up. They have. I mean, there's a brilliant scene as well where it's not long after the beating up of Liz where he breaks into number 11, doesn't he? And he is so terrifyingly angry, isn't he? Charlie Lawson can be, when he's being angry Jim, and he bursts in through the back of number 11. He's like. He's so compelling a character, and he gets dragged off by the police, and and he's just incredible. I would say that this particular period of 5 years isn't a golden era for the McDonalds. I found that, I mean, Andy leaves 98, and his character had certainly run its course. Steve, he's going through his kind of nasty, kind of gangstery phase with a scruffy beard at this point. I didn't really like him. He kind of lost that comedic edge. Liz, she also goes through a few things with some gangsters, which I don't think we particularly watched together, but I never found that interesting. But through it all, I did really, really enjoy watching Jim and seeing him go to his lowest point, and that's which included, as you alluded to earlier, when he gets pushed off the scaffolding at the building site and ends up in that wheelchair, and that wonderful scene with him and Maud, which I remember thinking kind of blew my socks off at the time. Watching it again, it was just incredible. The performances that Elizabeth Bradley and Charlie Lawson gave, where Maud's there, she sees Jim in the previous episode, I think, trying to wheel himself in front of Mike Baldwin's car to try and kill himself, and she comes along and says, "I'll help you kill yourself if you want to." And over the course of this conversation, which is like maybe the first scene of the episode, which you don't usually get such hard-hitting scenes right early on in episodes, she kind of makes him see that, what would the old Jim think of you if you still know your army number and everything.
And this was
go on.
This was a really powerful scene. This was a really powerful scene between two characters that would never normally talk to each other.
Yes.
But I don't think this scene would ever happen now.
Why? Because,
number one, I don't think they would redeem Jim. They would certainly not make us sympathise with him anymore than they would do, because of the changing perceptions about domestic violence. And I want people to make up their own minds in their heads about what they think what the appropriate thing to do is, because I'm not saying the 90s was the best way to deal with it, and I'm not saying that now is the best way to deal with it. I want people to think in their minds about whether they think what they think is the best way to deal with a character like Jim or like Jeff. Okay. The other thing is, you cannot always common sense somebody out of being suicidal. Okay. Maybe when somebody's feeling a bit dramatic and feeling sorry for themselves, this would work, okay? So this situation between Maud and Jim, this was what he needed. Yeah,
because we'd seen in the previous weeks him sort of failing with his wheelchair, getting angry, really frustratingly angry about not being able to be the fit young man that he used to be.
But now, I don't think Coronation Street would have that kind of scene, and I would agree that now is not the time for that kind of thing, because you can't just talk somebody out of what he was going through unless they're that exact kind of person in that exact kind of situation, because we know a lot more about mental health now than we did then, and we know a lot more about how to deal with somebody who's going through something as traumatic as what he was going through. Maybe that would still work on Jim. Or maybe he needs somebody professional to help him deal with his problems.
Sadly for him, the only professional he got was Michael, the physiotherapist, who ends up having it off with Liz, and then she disappears off. And again, I barely...
But you see what I'm saying? Like, at the time, but this probably is what has contributed to a misunderstanding of how to deal with mental health issues in this country. That kind of thing where... And I'm not going to knock it, because it was a really great scene. It was really powerful stuff. It was well acted. It was well written. It felt really honest and real at the time. But we know better now. You see? And so Coronation Street is always having to struggle with creating dramatic and compelling scenes, but also making sure to not be misleading and not being irresponsible with the power that they have to shape people's opinions and lead people down in an appropriate pathway to deal with the issues that they're having. And in no way do I think Coronation Street should always be like, this is the model way to behave. And it really annoys me when people act like that's what they're trying to say. You know, when they say, oh, so I can't believe that so-and-so said this about that. That's awful. You shouldn't ever say this to somebody, blah, blah, blah. That really frustrates me. But I do think they're a bit more conscious about it than they were before.
Yeah.
And, but, you know, if you brush away the whole social responsibility and what should you actually really say to somebody in this situation, it was just a really great scene, and I don't think you could have something like that now.
Maud was such a brilliant character, and the fact that she was able to hang on to the show 2 years after Maureen left, when she was just brought in as the cantankerous mum, the thorn in Reg Holsworth's side. She carried on as a fairly, for somebody of her age, a fairly important character, and a very wise, advice giving,
sage.
Yeah, but with a bit of a cheeky humour as well. Like that when Fred takes over the shop, and she hides a bit of fish inside the shop, and Fred's trying to wonder where the stink comes from. But then you get your what was it, the other episode that we saw with Maud recently, where she's going out with, what's his face, Sydney, from the retirement home, who Fred and Audrey end up taking out for a drive because they want to check out what he's like, because what are his intentions honourable.
For a ride.
Yeah, and then he ends up dying. That was a hilarious episode where he's this dead guy in the back of the car.
They're driving through the countryside, and then Audrey is trying to talk to him and realises they've got a dead man in the back of the seat, and they pull over in the middle of the moors or wherever they are in the beautiful countryside, and she's fretting about the fact that they've got this corpse in the back.
And it's all going to look terrible for her because she's a counsellor.
She's worrying about her reputation, and she also doesn't want a dead man in the back. And then who is it driving? Fred.
Oh, but Fred was driving. Yeah, Fred was driving. Yeah.
So they go back to
Mayfield. They go back to Mayfield Court, don't they? The retirement home.
Well, that's where he lives, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Sorry, yeah.
So they go back there, and then the policeman comes.
No, Maud's there at first, aren't they? And they have to duck down, and then Sydney's dead body kind of collapses over to one side.
Yeah, so she doesn't see he's in the car.
And then the policeman comes and like, hello there, Councillor Roberts.
Are you all right? And she's like, oh yes, he's so tuckered out.
That felt like it was a kind of classic comedy caper.
Yeah, it was.
Which is definitely a lot rarer in modern Coronation Street. But then, at the end of the episode, when Maud finds out that her fiance is dead, again, another brilliant performance, and she's now gone, hasn't she? She leaves at the end of 99. We didn't see her last episode. No. But really wonderful character. Let's talk about some of the other characters that we had to say goodbye to during this era, because there was quite a lot, weren't there?
There were a lot of really iconic characters out there.
A lot of them because of Brian Park.
But if I would look, so normally, I think actually we're moving into an era where post this time, when you say who left this year, you can come up with 5 or 6 names of people that people saying, I don't know who that is. But this year, this group of 5 years, we said goodbye to Reg, Bet, Alf, Raquel, Don, Percy, Derek, Mavis, Maureen.
Lots of big names.
These are all characters that still, I would say, a Corrie fan would recognise and say these were big icon characters.
I mean, Reg ends up leaving fairly. I think he's like autumn of '95. He kind of really, he does. He really slips off, doesn't he? Because he has that final story, which I did find hilarious, when he was accused of being the Red Reg Flasher, and he has that identity parade scene, doesn't he?
Yeah.
When you got all these other Reg lookalikes lined up next to him, and he's standing there next to the guy who is the Flasher, and as this old lady is walking down the lineup, Reg is like going, it was them, trying to make her see who it was, and just makes himself look more guilty, and she picks him, of course, instead. But then, within weeks of that, he's off to Lowestoft, and we never see him again, which is
it's a shame. But if you look at, say, culturally, what's going on in the middle of the end of the 90s, Austin Powers, that came out in 1997, and that lampooned this kind of British seaside raucous man chases woman to like goose her bum kind of comedy, and he epitomised that on Coronation Street. He was the slapstick boob guy of Coronation Street, and Austin
I can't
Powers
imagine him
making fun of that was the death of that kind of comedy being taken seriously.
I can't imagine at all Reg in the 1999 Coronation Street. It wasn't his era.
Work.
I mean, he'd be there. We just watched an episode where some of the Freshgos lot go rambling on the moors in the middle of the night, don't we? So there was Curly, Nita Desai, Alma, Ken, who's working as a trolley pusher at that time, Fred.
Yes,
and although that was there as Ashley as well, although that was there as a comedy caper light, although I didn't find it particularly funny, I just can't imagine Reg doing that. His era was gone.
Well, he would have completely dominated the entire thing.
Yeah, and as it was, Fred did. And Fred was a kind of a Reg replacement, but toned down a little bit. Because when Fred came into it in 94, he was also a massive perv, wasn't he? Lusting after Audrey.
There's a certain element between Reg and Fred where Reg was the butt of jokes, but also I think people who... He was the butt of jokes, but he also had a bit of power in his own right. Whereas Fred, I felt like, was always a bit of a pompous idiot, and nobody sympathised with him.
I don't know.
They sympathised with his humanity and his human side, but I don't know. I think that Reg appealed to a different group of people than Fred did, where you're laughing more at Fred, and Reg kind of felt like he was more in charge of the jokes.
Yeah,
I don't know if that makes any sense. Where I think that he was more self-aware, and I think that he was like the carry-on Coronation Street.
Fred had more sides to him. He was a lot more rounded of a character. He had some really brilliant dramatic scenes, like when we saw the scenes where Ashley finds out that Fred is actually his dad. What brilliant! How proud he was at Ashley's wedding. Whereas Reg, every scene pretty much, Ken Morley hammed up to the to the highs, and it was just. I loved watching him. Whereas Fred, he would have the serious scenes as well.
There was a confidence in the humour around Reg that made me think that they knew that nobody would really challenge this as being funny or say this was inappropriate. Whereas I felt there was a bit more self-awareness with Fred. Like, we know that this is not the dominant. He's not like the main comedic point of the show.
Yeah, no, I can.
Where like the joke became, isn't this stupid? Isn't the fact that people find this funny stupid? Reg never had that. It was just as it was played completely. I know this is going to sound stupid, but it was played straight. Like, this is the joke. The joke is he's a pervert.
Yeah.
The joke is he's molesting Maureen in the bed. That's the joke. Whereas with Fred, it was more like, it's funny that Fred doesn't get how preposterous he is.
I think I see what you mean.
I don't know if that was 100% for both of those characters, but I really do think that something shifted in between those two characters about how the jokes were received.
I think when I think about Fred as well in the time, one of my favourite Fred moments was after Maureen leaves him, and that was another example of how John Savardon could play the tragedy, the drama so well, because this is a week after he's got married to Maureen, and then she hops off in the back of a taxi with Bill Webster, which is a really sweet ending as scandalous as it was. But then for the following week, Fred closes himself off from the world, and he's smoking on his cigars, isn't he?
Giant, a cigarette with a massive long bit of ash on the end of it, just ready to fall.
Like his life has fallen apart, and Maud and Ashley are trying to get through to him. He was such a wonderful character.
And another thing about him,
so totally over dramatic and camp as well.
He was so imposing and very Shakespearean. I really would say that he theatrical is definitely a good word.
His repeating himself, and even when every so often he'd have these little moments where he'd take somebody round this arm and then turn round and say, "Now see," and have these little loud private conversations with them. I loved Fred.
But again, talking about it's Coronation. We're kind of insinuating here Coronation Street takes a bit of a turn for more realism in this era than it did.
Yeah.
But imagine Fred now in Coronation Street. Again, we've shifted further away from that kind of character. And you still have people that are larger than life, like Mary, for example. But, you know, how dramatic, how singular would Mary have been in the 90s? I don't know. She would have just been another comedy character in a cast of really colourful, outrageous people. Whereas now, she's probably one of the most outrageously colourful people on the show.
Yeah.
Another person that, talking about outrageously colourful people, Dev. Dev is introduced in the very last.
We've seen like 2 episodes of him in, haven't we?
A completely different kind of person. I mean, there's proto-Dev a little bit. His voice is different. It
did sound a bit different, but he was still a real charmer, wasn't he? He was a smooth talker. And it's funny seeing what Dev is now. He kind of believes that he still is a player, because back then he actually was. And he was this handsome, smooth talker.
Big businessman with his flash car coming in to save the corner shop and help out his relative.
As I say, we've only seen a bit of it, but I don't know whether there was the same element of comedy with Dev then as there is now. I guess we'll have to see a little bit more of him, but that was quite cool seeing him.
I know a lot of people talk about, you know, how the kind of the value of a woman drops after the age of 35 at a radical degree due to her kind of losing her looks, and I'm being sarcastic here, but, you know, women over a certain age certainly lose their value. But people like Dev, they continue to think that they're still, like, you know, the big I am. But instead of sort of losing relevancy like a woman would do, he just becomes the butt of jokes because he's, like, past it, but he doesn't realise that he is. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, and the same thing with Steve, where they think they're, you know, the cock of the walk, but...
Yeah. He's just,
they're just a bit of a
over the
old man.
So Dev came in alongside, or just a little bit after, the rest of the Desai family, didn't they? Which was Coronation Street, or one of their attempts to say, look how modern we are. We've got an Asian family.
Cast.
I know they're running a corner shop, which is maybe a little bit stereotypical. And I think the actress, I read something earlier, the actress who played Nita Desai kind of spoke about that and said, well, the thing is, a lot of Asian people do run corner shops. A lot of corner shops are run by Asian families, so it actually is realistic.
Thing, like, you know, how far do you represent what life is like versus what a stereotype is, and what's the difference really, and is it responsible? I don't know, it's really difficult because so far the Desais haven't made much of an impression, have they? I mean, we had Ravi Desai, who was the dad, and I think we maybe saw him in 2 episodes, and he was another one of these larger than life characters, wasn't he? Like, Nito, my darling. I think Coronation Street has done well with keeping Dev, but their first attempts of it with the Desais just didn't particularly work. Vic Cram's not really done that much, has he? And he's the one that lasts the longest. Nita Desai, gosh, she was dull. We've seen quite a lot of her, actually, haven't we? 5, 6 episodes maybe of her. What's her personality? She's just dull and intelligent, and she knows a bit about business. She's very much.
She's got a stick up of her bum.
Freeman of.
She is totally the Angie Freeman of the late 90s. Angie she came back and then hung around for a few years, didn't she, in the mid 90s? And then we just kept, whenever she came on screen, we were like, have you not gone yet, Angie?
I really didn't like Angie. I found
she was so bland. And I know she's got her fans. She has got her admirers, Angie Freeman has, but I just cannot see it. She didn't do anything of any note or interest or anything, Angie Freeman. She was, to me, she was the start of the bland, pointless characters that then continued with the likes of Samantha Fellsworth, for example.
Can I just say, to me, this felt like Coronation Street trying to address another stereotype, or try to right some wrongs perhaps, and represent a creative, single, young woman trying to make her way in the world in the 90s.
We're talking Angie here.
Angie. And they kind of failed because they were trying to pander to a group of people without making a story or a character interesting and compelling. That's what it felt like to me, like a bit patronising, because she was boring. Because I think that they were trying to make her into something to represent a group of people. And that's always the danger with Coronation Street or any soap, where you have you try to represent a group of people that aren't being represented properly, and instead you just insult a whole lot of them all at once.
Yeah.
Because Coronation Street isn't about young single businesswomen, is it?
Not quite, no.
No, so that's why Angie was a bit boring.
Yeah, she was, but like I was saying, she wasn't the only bland character at the time, and I don't remember when we watched in the 60s, 70s and 80s there being quite so many stories or characters where I would just kind of switch off when it came on, and anything to do with Angie I was like not interested.
I don't really know what she even did.
No, and then Samantha Fellsworth was the other one that I mentioned.
Yeah, I don't
she
really know
was
what
in
she
it
did
for
either.
2 years or so, and
She's a sexy lady and she went away.
yeah, and then she caused a bit of problem. She caused a bit of trouble with Natalie Horrocks before she went. But she's played by Tina Hobley, I think, and I didn't remember finding her interesting at all the first time round. And she's one of the there's been a few characters where when I've watched it this time round, I've been like, oh, I didn't appreciate them the first time. I quite like them now. But with Samantha Fellsworth, it's just like no, utterly dull. And Des gets involved with her towards the end as well, doesn't he? And I remember not really liking Des back in the 90s, but when we saw him in the early 90s, when he was having his cheeky chappy times and his pranks, playing pranks on the Wiltons and everything, he was all right. But once we got into the second half of the 90s, Des just lost it. He was just a waste of space, and then he gets involved with Natalie, who I also didn't particularly enjoy. His death was all right, but I was certainly, once he'd gone, I wasn't wishing for Des to come back at all. I think as well it was the fact that once the Wiltons left, he lost any kind of purpose that he ever had. I enjoyed, it was quite poignant seeing Des's final scene with Derek, because Des goes sailing off in his barge at one point, doesn't he? And unbeknownst to them, that'd be the last time they'd ever see each other again. But yeah, wasn't Derek's death sad?
Yes.
When he was driving home. You didn't know. The episode that we were watching, I knew that was going to be Derek's death, and I hadn't told you.
No, I know.
And it was Mavis's 60th birthday party, I think.
I know, sometimes I will not know that the episode we're watching is
I never tell you,
thing,
this is the episode I think it's going to happen.
but I will know the circumstances surrounding whatever it is, and I'll know that it's going to come up. So I remember when it was Mavis's party, I went, oh dear.
I couldn't remember whether it was the party that made you think it, or when we literally saw him driving.
I don't know.
Driving home, and then there's this prat in the car behind him that's honking at him, and it's like, and I think around that must have been when you're like, oh, this is the moment, isn't it? And then you have Derek with his road rage incident, and the guy's making fun of the giant paperclip on the top of his car and everything. Oh, it's so sad. And pompous Derek gets all the fluster and then just conks out on the seats of the car, and then there's this his classic music, Tip Willow or something, is playing,
Tip Willow.
And it's just
like an old English
perfect
folk song.
Yeah, perfectly tragically stupid death with Derek.
Really, I tell you what, it was that selection of that track felt very deliberate to me from the perspective of Derek being probably Percy was gone by this point.
Not quite. No, he lasted another 8-9 months.
He
or
really
so.
felt like that kind of little Englander, that kind of Rule Britannia sort of Brit. I don't know. Was Derek too young to fight in the war? He must have been.
Yeah.
That kind of guy that takes credit for the Empire and loves British things without really kind of critically examining what that means, and revels in kind of, because Mavis and Derek were a joke, weren't they?
Yeah, and that was...
And that kind of middle class aspirational kind of idea, and having your conservatory and champagne out of a wine glass and all this kind of stuff. That track kind of epitomised that idea, and I certainly don't. There's nothing wrong with being that kind of person. If you want to take pride in things that you had no hand in, have at it. There are plenty of other people that do very similar things to that, but it just kind of felt like it was such a deliberate choice of that classic folk song. Nobody in Corrie now would have that kind of personality.
No.
There's nobody like that now in Coronation Street. Nobody that, would go, yes, I'm going to join, maybe Roy would, or like join what they call the Morris dancers, or, that very, very, very traditional turn of the century kind of British stuff.
Yeah, it was an end of an era when Derek left, and maybe it's not long after Derek's funeral. Brilliant effort. Oh, go on.
I was going to say, if you think about Coronation Street, all the shows we've watched, often not often, but from time to time they would sing songs or refer to folk stories or very, very kind of Enid Blyton sort of stuff. That's gone now. That's completely gone.
Yeah.
That kind of era of Britishness.
Yeah.
And for all, and you know, Derek really symbolised quite a lot of the negative aspects of that, but also, you know, he wasn't a bad guy all in all.
No, he wasn't. He was the butt of so many jokes, like
Yeah.
you said, and that's brought up at his funeral, isn't it? Which is, I loved it when Ken's Mavis asked Ken to say some words at the funeral, and he doesn't know what to say, but then when his friend is called up to speak, then Norris pops up and he's like, I'll do it, and then he does this speech about basically saying what a rubbish wife Mavis was, and she's ashamed or just so embarrassed by it all, and over the course of the episode she just gets angrier and angrier at Norris and everybody else basically who spend the wake kind of having a laugh at Derek's expense. And then the speech that she gives where she says, well, thank you for all those words that you said about him, whether you meant them or not, it doesn't matter because they were true. And it was so wonderful seeing her stand up for the memory of Derek.
It reminded me of when Hilda stood up for Stan when everyone thought he was the peeper.
It was very similar to that.
And it is, you know, there's quite a lot of characters in Coronation Street that we're invited to laugh at for various reasons. You know, maybe they're not as clever as we think we are. Maybe they're not as sophisticated as we think we are. Maybe they like things that are a bit passé and a bit cliched. But they're also still human beings, and you know they don't like these things to annoy you or spite you. It's just how they are and what they like. And maybe Mavis likes to sit in the garden and like sketch a still life bowl of fruit, and you might think that's funny. Or what, you know, rescue a fox from being shot because she cares about animals. Just let them get on with it. That's kind of the moral of the story to me, that I thought. The Derek and Mavis story is like, yeah, it is funny, but you don't have to laugh at them in their face. You can have a little sneer and a titter behind their backs, but it doesn't make you better than they are just because you don't like to sit in your garden and look at daisies. I mean, what the hell do you think makes you so superior?
There are another couple of characters where I think would they have worked in Brian Park's new era, or was he right to get rid of Derek? Because Mavis wanted to leave anyway. Thelma Barlow wanted to leave, and that's why Brian Park decided to get rid of Peter Baldwin as well. But
has its own group of people that, you know, we're supposed to find pretentious, but really it's the people that find them pretentious that are really the pretentious ones, aren't they?
1997, that was the year when lots of characters left. So Billy Williams, he didn't get an exit, or he died off screen like a few years later, I think. He was gone. That was Betty's husband. But the best,
and they reminded me very much of modern day Arthur and Evelyn, where they were separated due to you know, the war or whatever.
Yeah,
like
that was sweet when he came back.
Sweetheart separated by 50 years.
Yeah, because he arrives on VE Day, doesn't he? And that was in this section that we watched. That was quite nice, but you know, fairly inconsequential in the end. No, my favourite my favourite week of this whole era, I think, was Don's death, which was like September, maybe October 1997, and I made you watch like a string of 5 or 6 episodes. This
was a proper rampage.
This was brilliant, and
this was Coronation Street does Grand Theft Auto.
It was.
It was just
so
like
at this
running
point,
around punching people out of cars and driving into canals.
Well, that was a different week, wasn't it? Because that was back in April or so, where Don kidnaps Alma, and basically since Ivy leaves, we get to see Don's decline into madness, and it was, in a way, it was Don in 1997 was a very different character to how he was when he came in the late 80s, I'm going to say, but it felt very, very believable how he would, you know, take this steady decline, and he's mad at Mike, so he kidnaps Alma. There were some brilliant episodes. Like there was like 2 or 3 episodes that were all set on the same night, where they're driving through the and then they do a canal dive like 4, 5, 6 years before Richard Tillman does it.
I know.
Don does it first. Brilliant stuff. But yeah, the week where he dies, at this point he's already been diagnosed with cancer. He knows that he's not got long left to go, and when he escapes out of the hospital, and he's kind of roaming the streets, and it just felt very, very tense and on edge. Like he goes stalking after Alma for a bit. He goes to see Sarah Louise at school, doesn't he? And she hasn't seen her granddad for all this time. And she's how old is she at this point? 10 maybe? 9, 10? She's got no idea what a dangerous, crazy man that he's become. And then they go off for a little walk together, and what did she say? Something like, he's like, I've got to go now, Sarah Louise. I've got something to do. And she says, oh, is it going to be fun? And he's like, I'm going to like it. And it was so chilling. That week was really, really chilling stuff. He also goes to the graveyard, doesn't he, to see Ivy's grave. And then Emily's there looking at Ernest's grave. And he's kind of acting just...
Yeah, that's right.
A bit
She's
insane,
tending, isn't she? She's tending the grave. She's just there by chance, and he's just like there looking, and And
he goes to see Ashley in the butcher shop, doesn't he? And there's the knife there.
Yeah.
He takes the knife off of the side, and it's like, what are you going to do with this, Don? And he gives Ashley a hug, and he's like, you're going to stab Ashley in the back. And Ashley kind of takes the knife off of him, because Ashley was the person that had been wronged by Don, because Don had said, he was the one that set fire to the factory earlier in this year, when it was actually Don who did it himself. But that week, honestly, I think that was my favourite single week of Coronation Street, possibly since, when the 1983... Ken, Deirdre, Mike love triangle, where it was just banger after banger of episodes, and that also coincided with Fred and Maureen and Bill and that whole saga there. But I loved that so much, but it just was unrelentingly tense, and I love that about Coronation Street when it really
it was proper
grips
tense,
you like that. And then he ends up crashing his car into the viaduct, doesn't he? Because he kidnaps Mike, bashes him round the head with a chair leg or something, I can't remember, then gets into his car, drives into the viaduct, explodes in a ball of flame. It was brilliant, and it just Brian Park brought sensationalism to Coronation Street in a big way, and that really epitomised it. And yes, it was a bit silly and everything, but I absolutely loved that.
One of the other things that we haven't spoken about was Deirdre. So you mean talk about the Deirdre love?
Yes, because that started.
Deirdre had a pretty ropey time, didn't she, during this period? Because this was when Samir dies. He gets killed.
Yeah, right at the beginning.
Yeah, right at the very
tragic
beginning.
Stuff.
So Samir was her immigrant husband.
Moroccan husband.
Who came over, and he was younger than she was, very sweet, unassuming man who offered to donate his kidney to Tracy,
because
Tracy had
taken bad ecstasy,
and so he was on his way to donate his kidney when he gets jumped.
He gets accosted down by the canal, doesn't he?
Racists by the canal, and he gets wheeled off to surgery, and she has to sort of kiss him goodbye.
Oh, that was tragic, wasn't it? When the last time that she sees him, and he's there about to be harvested, basically.
It's horrible.
And she has
to, because
Deirdre goes through the ringer.
It was a really interesting
years.
story too, because if she had not known that those organs were going to Tracy, how differently would she have reacted? And the guilt also of thinking, am I going to be pleased in any way that this has benefited my daughter? I don't, awful. Then also, she goes straight from that into John Lindsay.
Yeah, she has a bit of a break, doesn't she, for a few years? But the John Lindsay storyline starts late '97 as well. And you didn't see a whole lot of it, did you?
This was this was probably one of Corrie's most famous storylines of all time, only because of the press coverage, and that was the Weatherfield One.
It felt, when I was watching it on ITV3 early this year or late last year, I can't remember, it felt like it was a big deal. It was a proper long running twisty turny storyline, which they do a lot of now, but up until that point felt quite novel and unique for Coronation Street, and having this villain in and we hadn't seen a proper decent villain since Alan Bradley, maybe.
Yeah.
This was 8 years later, but watching her fall for his traps and just believing everything he says, taking the gold. He gives her the gold card. He tells her he's a pilot.
Yeah.
Actually, he just works at a tie shop, and the manipulations
in
and the
airport.
lies. Yeah. The lies that he tells her to convince her.
And he makes her take out loans and stuff.
Yeah.
So they get money, and he builds this fantasy world where they're going to live in a fancy house and do all this. I
love the scene where Ken spots him at the tie shop, and it zooms right into Ken. It's like a dolly zoom almost, wasn't it? Like, what is this?
Yeah, Ken, this was the birth of Ken as like the off-duty detective, isn't it? Because he goes and he speaks to one of John's colleagues who works at the tie shop and kind of fishes for information.
Mr. Lindsay.
Yeah, and he's there all the time. Just him and Mike are there supporting Deirdre, but also waiting for her to, go, oh, you rescued me, let's have sex. The whole time. They're so thirsty. And she's there going, oh no, I'm going to go to prison. And they're like, yeah, but what about a shag before? Because I helped you out, didn't I? I got you a lawyer and everything. Mike's paying for her... for
her legal fees. Alma doesn't like that.
Alma doesn't like that. And Ken's there going, I helped you find out that he bought that brandy from Furman's freezers, not from wherever he's, exotic locations that he got it from. And there's also, I think we spoke about this during the prisons discussion, so I won't get into it too much, but the sort of depiction of Deirdre in prison was probably the best story they've ever done that's been set in a prison, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Just the way, how awful the conditions were.
It just felt
real. How it affected Deirdre mentally.
Realistic it actually was, I don't know. But she actually, it wasn't just like, here's a new set for you, Deirdre. It was like, literally, you are in prison now, you're going to have to stay here.
And you didn't do anything.
And also, you never expected you to end up here.
No.
A lot of the time on Coronation Street, where the characters go to prison, you sort of expect, they're like, oh, in and out, oh, my brother's here, or, yeah, my mum did time, whatever.
Yeah.
Deirdre was like, I don't belong here. I'm a good girl. I didn't do anything wrong. Everyone's being mean to me. And she's got
that horrible officer, Veitch, she called, who was a bit of a realist, really, saying, look, you're in here. Everyone says that they didn't do anything.
It doesn't matter to me whether you did it or not.
But then you got Jackie Dobbs, who a lot of people hate, but we absolutely adore. And we got to see a few choice episodes of Jackie's where she's she helps Deirdre out, but also helps her see that you can't just go around saying you didn't do anything. She helped her toughen up, really.
Yeah, she's like, she's like, here you are, get on with it. This is what you got to do.
She did punch Veitch in the chest, which was good.
Liverpudlian kind of glamour push. She looked like Marilyn Monroe, and she sounded like one of the Beatles.
Yeah, absolutely loved her. When Deirdre comes out of prison, Jackie turns up for a little bit. We didn't see much of post-prison Jackie, did we, before she swans off again? But
Tyrone
she did.
Oh,
little Tyrone.
So
how old is he? 15 or so?
And the introduction of Tyrone reminded me so much of how Craig was introduced to the show, as it is almost exactly the same story. Layabout chavvy mum turns up with her big lumpy
Yeah, because the first scene that Tyrone's in, he's playing his Game Boy on the sofa, isn't he? He's playing Kirby.
He's a little chubby kid. And
he's so little chubby. He just want to go, on his cheeks.
It's just a sack of spuds, isn't he? He gives about as much emotion and reaction as a sack of spuds would do. Same with Craig. Craig was a bit of a goon, wasn't he?
He was definitely.
He was just a lug who just sat around and grunted.
Yeah, but we've seen over the course of the next year, Tyrone has really blossomed as a character, isn't he?
Well,
he gets a bit of a horn dog going after Toya for a bit.
He tried to sexually harass Toya for a little bit.
But you can see why the nation fell in love with Tyrone and Alan Halsall, just being such a cheeky, lovable little kid, didn't you?
Well, again, I can only speak from the episodes that I've actually seen, but it seems like Monica was the making of him because it gave him something to focus
Monica,
on.
We've seen a few episodes of her with
so
her.
So Monica was the greyhound that he gets as a pet.
Yeah, he had it. Can't remember whether we saw how he got her, and we know that he acquires this greyhound and then finds out that she belongs to someone else, but then we saw the owner didn't want her, so he gets to keep her.
Yeah,
and he's so excited about it.
And there's like a really sweet scene where they're talking about there's a race coming up later in the day, and Tyrone's like, yes, I told her all about it. She's a bit nervous, and the guy's like, she's a dog. She doesn't know that she's gonna have a race.
Yeah, and the episodes we've just watched, Monica's just been hit by a car, hasn't she?
So what's going to happen?
Don't think she's going to be racing again. Yeah, little Tyrone was wonderful. It was great seeing his character again. Who else have we seen that's new that's made him? Oh, we haven't really talked Roy and Hayley yet, have we? And Roy comes into it in 95, I think, and we saw his very first episode where he's just in one scene where he's bizarrely smiley and definitely a lot creepier than he turns out to be. I think it seems like he was introduced as a bit of a joke character who lives at the flats that Deirdre's staying in at that time, but over the course of the next few years he integrates into the street a lot more. He's closer to the Roy, kind of the worldly wise, little bit autistic maybe, but obviously it's never been said.
Exactly.
But still lovable character that he has grown to be and still is now, and I think that a lot of what turned him into that was when Hayley came along, and God, I love Hayley. She's definitely one of my favourites. She's in my top 10 characters.
So Hayley's story was really interesting in this because we have the introduction to Hayley, and we don't know her backstory originally.
No, not at first. She's working at Furman's Freezers with Alma, and she gets
fixated on Alma.
Yeah, she's obsessed with Alma, who she kind of sees as the role model of womanhood that she should try and
kind of
emulate.
Stalks her a little bit. I mean, if you want to, you've already got short hair. All you need to do is pop your collars, and immediately
You're Alma.
So she kind of, and then Alma gets really uncomfortable, and she's like, you got to back off a little bit. And Hayley realises that she's been a bit weird.
Yeah, so Alma then sets her up with... Well, she means to set her up with Curly, doesn't she? She organises this dinner party, and she wants to push Curly and Hayley together, but then Roy turns up as well. I can't remember why. But, they end up...
They're both very unsophisticated oddballs that just kind of fall in with each other.
Yeah, they end up going back to the Rovers together afterwards, don't they? And Alma's there going...
hit it off.
And we didn't see much of the initial stages of their blossoming romance on the DVDs, but having just watched it on ITV3, it really is super sweet, and they help each other out with the Red Wreck protest and everything. It is really absolutely gorgeous. And then you get the moment where Hayley reveals her past to Roy, and the fact that she wasn't born in this body, and Roy's reaction, just kind of shutting her down and not wanting anything to do with her, is tragic, because this beautiful love story, very, very similar to Nina and Seb, kind of, especially Nina with the oddballness of it, and the sweetness of it, and it coming together very quickly, and then it feels like it could be over, because not long after that, Hayley disappears off to Amsterdam, and we don't see her for another couple of months. But then we get the brilliant Amsterdam episodes in July 98, where Roy goes over there. He's like umming and ahhing about whether to go, and even when he goes there, he tells Hayley, "Oh, I just came over and I for some other reason, and I thought I'd pop by and see you while you're there." But you know that he's actually can't get her out of his mind. I love the scene as well before she goes off to Amsterdam. I don't know whether we watched this or whether it was just me, where he got this leaving present for her, and she unwraps it, and there's this dry old book about trains or whatever, and she has to act thankful for it, but then she opens it up and he's put a little pendant inside or something. It's so adorable.
I didn't see that one.
And obviously at the end of the Amsterdam episodes, he can't bring himself to say that he wants her to come back with him.
She is there, basically
really
like,
hinting.
I'll come with you, but you've got to commit to me. And he doesn't get it, or he doesn't want to, or he's just confused. He struggles with his feelings and his emotions. She goes over there as well for her sexual reassignment surgery. That's right, yeah. So that's why she's gone, and it obviously is very complicated for Roy to work through not just these feelings of romance for somebody, but also what does he think about. This is so
out of his comfort zone, and this was also his understanding of life in general.
Also for people watching as well. This is a very... this was a groundbreaking story. This was a very instrumental in sort of trans rights in this country. And the acceptance. And people understanding what it means and what we should,
which we're seeing an awful lot of now.
So
a lot of this is down to this very story. It's so groundbreaking.
So Hayley's...
influential.
Yeah. And then Roy kind of leaves...
Yeah, he goes, and again, he leaves her a little present. He leaves her a watch or something, I can't remember.
Because he can't really communicate his feelings in person. He can only do it through messages.
Yeah, and then we get one of my favourite all-time romantic scenes on Coronation Street, where he's there at the airport, and Hayley's banging on the window. She decides to follow after him, and somebody behind Roy in the queue's like, "I think somebody over there wants to speak to you." And then he goes over, and she writes, "I'm coming with you," and lipstick on the window, and it's backwards, and you can see him like tracing along the letters with his finger, trying to work out what she's written, and this beautiful smile breaks out on his face, and Roy smiles so
rarely,
so seldomly. Yeah, I absolutely adore it.
Special.
And then at the end of that episode, we see her getting stopped by the passport people, or the customs people, don't we? Because her passport obviously doesn't match.
Well, yeah.
And
her name, I don't know if she's changed her name.
I can't remember whether it was still Harold on the passport or not.
Well, he calls her Sir. So I imagine that her gender on her passport doesn't match how she's presenting.
Yeah. Yeah, and over the course of the next year or so, we see, like, I think Mike Baldwin finds out from Alma. Oh, no, he...
There's Les
Mike
and Mike are the two bigoted characters.
Yeah, but they have to have, for this
This is
story
what
to
I'm
really
saying.
work, and it
Coronation
helps us
Street
be
can't-
sympathetic, even more
can't do
sympathetic
it
towards
now.
Hayley.
We have to import characters and make them up to be bigoted,
Yeah.
to sort of represent these views. Whereas Coronation Street wasn't afraid to sacrifice people or to, because of it,
If they're thinking, which characters here would not get on with this? And Mike and Les absolutely wouldn't, especially Les. He'd just be
they were
making
very
fun of it.
traditional and closed-minded.
And Mike
and
was thinking of the
simplistic.
Mike was thinking that of the fact that it would have on his business, because Hayley's working for him at this point, and he's like, I'm going to sort of sack Hayley because what will
They'll just be
the
talking
workforce
about it all
think?
the time.
He only
They
cares
won't
about
like it.
his business and his profits and everything. And Anne was there desperately trying to get him to see her as a person, but he won't.
Yeah.
And what I also really liked with Hayley's story, the proposal was sweet at the 70s.
Oh yeah, we got to
disco
see that too. Yeah, everyone was dressed up.
But also the wedding, which was a brilliant episode. But I really liked it. Hayley's uncle comes along and he's still calling her Harold, and he's refusing to, accept her. But then she sits him down and talks to him and sort of shares her experiences and everything. And then at the end of the episode, he calls her Hayley. And
he
sweet.
sort of rocks up and he's like, "Look, put your trousers on and come home." And she says,
Oh, yeah, he does, doesn't he? Put your trousers on, let's get home.
This is silly.
We'll go and play dominoes at the pub, at the Legion or something.
And then she's saying, "I'm not pretending anything. This is who I am." And
this is who I've always been.
And he accepts it, and it is really he's like, "I don't get it, but all right."
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the wedding where they go up to the church, don't they? Which is that one in Duckingfield that I went to visit last year. And Les has tipped off the press. So they all scarper back to the cafe where they have
let's just put this into context here. This was not a wedding that could legally have taken place in this country.
No.
Because there was no gender recognition or altering of your birth certificate if you were what was called a transsexual in those days, and now would be called transgender. You couldn't change your gender ID or anything, and also you couldn't marry a member of the same sex. So technically, Hayley on her birth certificate was still Harold, and Harold and Roy could not get married. So
Les was phoning at the press saying, a couple of blokes getting married. And it was so crazy watching that and thinking, wow, how much of a scandal this was. And it was only 20 years ago.
I know. So they had to sort of... And what was that famous quote about the world changes?
Yeah, well, that was when they actually got married, or legally got married. Roy saying... The world changed and met us, or something like that.
Yeah, that's really poignant and sweet.
Yeah.
But
the wedding that we saw was
the
lovely.
wedding was with a vicar who was sympathetic to their situation and
they were like a
agreed to
Unitarian
marry
vicar.
them despite the situation being slightly unusual.
And the fact that it would still be illegal as well. So they end up getting married in the cafe because Hayley comes down, doesn't she? And everyone's there waiting for her. It's lovely. It's such a wonderful romance.
It's absolutely fantastic that Roy and Hayley, if they were to meet now, would not have any opposition or any struggles. They could just go and they could get married. Fantastic, and it'd be legally recognised. But Rana and Zidane, their marriage still would not be legally recognised unless they went and got it done in a register office. And that really annoys me, I have to say.
Yeah.
I really find it very upsetting that religious ceremonies are only recognised for a very narrow band of religions in this country, and I don't really see how people can see the difference. Why can't we recognise Muslim weddings?
Yeah, I know.
I just thought
it feels like that's
and
something
nobody
that...
seems to mind either. It seems like nobody's talking about this. Maybe Muslim people don't mind about this, but I find it a bit offensive.
Well, coming up in a couple of years, we'll see Dev and Sunita's Hindu wedding as well. And they have a civil ceremony first, and then the next episode they have the big all singing, all dancing Hindu ceremony.
That's like the usual practice in most countries that other than this.
Yeah,
country.
that's true. Like in France, you have to go to the town hall, don't you?
I know in China you have to go and register your marriage before you have it, or it's a separate process. Whereas in this country, if you get married in a religious ceremony in the Church of England church, and I don't know what I know some other religions, it's the same thing. But it's all done there. That's all done and dusted, and you're legally married and you're religiously married at the same time.
Yeah. Speaking of marriages, Gemma, can we get on to what was possibly the greatest episode of this whole, however many we must have watched in the past 5 years, Raquel and Curlie's wedding. And on my little notes here, where I sometimes put stars next to the ones that stand out, I put 4 stars next to this one. I don't think I put 4 stars next to either of these. And I remember, and it was a long time ago, it was like 3-4 months ago now, but both of us were on the edge of our seats during this episode. And this was the very first hour-long episode that Coronation Street had done. It had been organised for the 35th anniversary of Coronation Street. I remember watching it at the time. It was just as brilliant now as it was back then. It was just felt unsettling all the way through, didn't it?
Yeah.
Because it was bizarre. It was set over like 4 days and 4 nights, all in the course of this hour, and then they have the wedding day, and so much happens, because it starts off with Raquel. Raquel goes to bed with Des, and then but then the next morning, and she thinks that at this point that she's finally going to stick with Des, because we'd already seen, her going back and forth between him and Curlie earlier on in the year, in the previous year, but she thinks that she's finally been accepted by Des, but he sends her home like, I was only sleeping with you, that was all. She goes on and has a bit of a cry with Betty, and then she has a scene with Maud, who basically says, that Curlie's a nice chap actually. So she goes and just proposes to him on the doorstep. They keep it a secret, and you can tell that she's only doing it because she feels that she has to, and her heart's not in it. She even says to to Curlie, I think, we need to keep this a secret so that nobody can have a chance to talk me out of it.
Exactly.
Just showing that this romance, which I was so invested in back in the mid-90s, it was all built upon, Curlie's infatuation with Raquel and her kind of feeling that she needed to settle for somebody who was just a steady, reliable, sensible guy.
Well, look, can I just say, I haven't seen all the episodes with Raquel in it, I don't know, but I would have thought that, being as she was a very attractive, very pretty, and very traditional-minded young woman, brought up to come of age during the mid-90s, perhaps would have had it drilled into her that you grow up and get married, have babies, and your husband will take care of you. And this was probably like the beginning of the end of that kind of generation of women being the norm. Like nowadays people have more of a mixed range of different ambitions about women do, about what they want their lives to look like, but it would certainly have been very normal for Raquel to have thought this. So really, she's just looking around, who's going to be the one.
Well, she also had her ambitions of, being a top model and everything, didn't she? But I think at this stage in her life, she realises she's maybe a bit too old for it.
Well, she's over the age of 21, she's definitely past it to be a model.
It was just so heartbreaking seeing them both blundering into this wedding that wasn't right for them. She goes and has a cry in the toilets beforehand, doesn't she? And Curlie knows as well. He overhears somebody saying, "There's a girl that's crying her heart out in the toilets there," but he goes through with it because this is what he's always wanted.
He's scared of losing her.
Yeah,
and
again,
he knows,
because he'd already lost her a year before.
Well, he thinks that he's punching above his weight with Raquel, and that was always a bit of a joke with Raquel and Curlie, that they kind of like made him look even more ridiculous with his big Coke bottle glasses and his silly hair. And then you have her, made up and looking beautiful and being Miss Weatherfield and all this stuff. He's anxious about losing out on this dream woman because, in his mind, it's how she looks is one of the most important things, and the fact she's sweet and submissive. And then Raquel's worried that she's going to miss her chance to find a nice man, because she's seen what men can be like.
Yeah.
She's been taken advantage of.
And she knows that Curlie wouldn't do that.
Yeah, and these two people who, on paper, perhaps, would work out fine, just not made for each other, meeting each other at the point where they're both ready to settle down. It's just like this kind of... It's like reverse Romeo and Juliet, isn't it? Where they're just not right for each other at all. But
it was quite sweet on the QE2 VHS special that we saw, where... they kind of have a second wedding again, don't they? And I think they have a bit of a heart-to-heart, and Curlie realises that kind of what's been going on, and Raquel decides that no, maybe this could work out. And so that's all kind of quite sweet. But over the course of 1996, you see Raquel having her aromatherapy courses. She comes back a bit of a different person, doesn't she? She's got her hair cut short, straight. She's a lot more sensible. She's not quite so ditzy as she used to be. And by the end of the year, she's kind of realised that I can do better than this. And she swans off to Kuala Lumpur, never to see Curly. Well, never to see Curly again for a few years at least. But I didn't really like what they did with Raquel in her final year. It was the episode where she goes was so tragic because Curly goes off to a Furman's course or something, doesn't he, with Eric, and Raquel's left at home, and he's like, if you're not there and when I get back, I'll understand. And she irons his shirts for him, doesn't she? She goes and has a sad goodbye with Judy, and then she disappears into the night.
But this was, I think, really cleverly set up because you have Curly, who didn't ask Raquel, I don't remember this, if she did or not, is it alright if I go on this retreat for my business? He goes off because he's the breadwinner in this traditional relationship that they've both found themselves in. He's the man, he's the one in charge. He goes off and he can do what he likes for his career.
Yeah.
And then she's at home and like her symbolically ironing the shirt, which would be her for the next 40 years.
Yeah. At
home while he's off, twiddling her thumbs, ironing his shirt. Or she could bugger off to Kuala Lumpur and be the head of a beautician's operation over there, experience a whole new world, live on her own independently, and live her dreams.
Yeah. And I think
Why would you pick to stay at home and iron a shirt?
He's realised he's letting her go because it transpires that when she went to the interview for this job, she had taken her wedding ring off, hadn't she? And and when they said, have you got any ties back at home? She says no, and he finds this out about her, and he can't. He's been thinking this probably for the whole of the past year when she's been with him.
Like in the back of his mind.
Yeah, what if, or this is going to happen at some point. She's going to realise that she can do better than me, and because life is just a series of failures for Curly and things going wrong for him, he's just like, well, this is the latest in the line, so I'll let her go.
I'll deal with it. Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, if that's what you wanted out of life is to be the woman at home who irons the shirts and cooks the tea. That's fine too, but that's not what she wanted, and she didn't realise really until she was offered something different.
Yeah.
Because God knows, if you gave me the choice, if I get to stay at home and iron your shirts and cook your tea and not have to have a job,
You'd love it. You'd take that straight away,
every
wouldn't you?
single time. I ain't got any Kuala Lumpur backup plans, Michael. This is it.
Speaking of exits, Bet's departure in 1995.
What a fiery exit.
And end of eras.
That really was a massive turning point in Coronation Street.
Yeah, the one where the few before she goes, and that pals scene with Rita, that's another iconic scene that you'd heard of, hadn't you? So the backstory with this is that God, what even is it? She
wants to buy the Rovers, and she wanted to use
because Newton and Ridley are selling it up, aren't they?
She was going to invest, and she wanted Rita to put the money in so that Bet could buy it and run it, and Rita would, be the silent partner. And they were best friends for most of the time they were in Coronation Street, because they were very much birds of a feather. They were both kind of young and good-looking girls when they came into the show, unlucky in love, and sort of independent women who were trying to make their way without a man on their arm. And then, life happened to both of them and kicked them in the face. But luckily, Rita kept getting men who died and gave her lots of money, unlike Bet. So Bet ended up at this, similar age to Rita with nothing to her name, asked her friend for help. And Rita kept hearing from everybody, oh, I heard you're going to buy the Rovers with Bet. Oh, Bet told me that you're going to buy the Rovers, and she got her nose put out of joint. And this is really the life story of Rita, and I find Rita such an interesting character retrospectively going back on her life history here. All she's ever had is people coming at her for cash, and all she's ever done is tell people no. She's always seems to have, like,
unless you're Sally,
every so often she'll just randomly gift people ridiculous sums of money to try to win them over, but most of the time she's just no, it's all my cash, I need it for cardigans. And then Bet comes in to sort of talk to Rita, and Rita's like, sorry, I've changed my mind, I'm not getting it. And this was literally her only chance, Bet's only chance, because the only other person who she knew in her life who had any money was Vicky, and Vicky wouldn't buy her the Rovers. No. And the same reason that Rita didn't want to was because they were both worried that there was no money in it.
Yeah, because I think Alf was the one that had said to Rita, you need to think, why hasn't Bet you know,
why can't she get a loan?
And why hasn't she got a load of savings from all this profits that she's apparently getting at the Rovers?
Yeah. Very suspicious, really, if you think about it.
But I felt so bad for Bet, because Rita had certainly led her to believe that she was gonna buy into it, and Bet had like gone off to the brewery, hadn't she? And she comes back all, you know, full of smiles and everything with all these grand plans about these two girls, best friends, running it together. And that scene where Rita says no, and
I hope we can still be friends.
Yeah, I hope we can still be pals. And Bet's like, pals, you don't know the meaning of the word. It was so raw and brilliantly acted by Julie and Barbara, and it was really sad because that was the end of their friendship, and they've still not had the chance to make up, have they?
Not even off screen. We've not even had in passing reference.
No.
And we know that Julie Goodyear is still around.
She is. There's still a chance. She
had like an ill-fated return, as everybody knows.
Yeah, we're a few years away from that.
I do not know what the plans, whether there were ever any plans for her to reconcile with Rita. But I really find it very interesting that all these years have passed since these characters had this very famous falling out, and nothing has been mentioned about it ever since. And still, it finds it really funny as well that Jenny's buying the Rovers now, and Rita's her foster mum, and Rita's never said to her, I had the chance to buy the Rovers once, it was the worst mistake I ever made, and turning that down, I can't believe
Well, you never know.
Because we have Sharon turning up going, you ruined my wedding to Ian Bentley. How many people actually really remembered Sharon and Ian Bentley from 20 years back versus how many people remember this iconic scene between Rita and Bet where she says, pals, you don't know the meaning of the word pals. That's way famous. Yeah. That's more famous than the character of even Sharon to begin with.
It is. But I did like Bet's final scenes where she kind of makes herself all up. She puts the keys on the bar, doesn't she? She's got a birdcage earring. She looks at herself in the mirror. Yeah. And then interestingly, it's Don who comes in and shares her final scene, isn't it? Who they hadn't had a whole lot to do with each other. They'd spent the night together once. But he kind of whisks her away. Oh, God, there's a cabbie that says, "You hope you'll find the sun," and she's like, "Oh, but they all do." I'm paraphrasing here really badly, but it reminded me quite a lot of Elsie's final scenes where she's like, now there's a question before she disappears off into the night. So that was quite a satisfying ending, but yet another death knell for classic Corrie in inverted commas. But she comes back, as you said, and maybe that's not so good. We'll see when that happens in a few years' time. So I think we're getting close to the end of this.
We've been going for over 2 hours.
We haven't talked at all, and I think it's worth mentioning. The other big story of the time was Sally and Kevin and their split, because a lot has been said in interviews about Brian Park coming in and saying, right, who's the longest term couple, who's the happiest couple, I'm going to split them up. And we got to see that, and actually that was a really brilliant story. And I didn't like Natalie the first time I watched it. I still didn't really like her at this time, but that actual story where Kevin's sneaking around and Sally finds out with the moment that when she goes round to Natalie's house and is banging on her door going, Kevin,
great.
And he's there with his top off and everything, really
looking out the window going, God, she's here.
And it made you hate Kevin, didn't it? And when Sally goes round to Natalie's house a few weeks later and turns the taps on and floods her house, it's like, revenge, writes whore on the mirror. That was fantastic. It's just a shame that after that the story it wasn't so good. I mean, Kevin comes back to stay with Sally at Christmas after Sophie and Rosie charm him with their 2-man nativity play, but then after that it just gets a bit grimy with Sally going off with Chris Collins and Danny. It just
evolved into a series of random
other bunk ups, really, didn't it?
Affairs and stuff that I wasn't bothered about, and I lost track of what she was doing. And she was with Greg Kelly.
Oh god, yeah, the Greg Kelly story.
And he turned out to be evil. And what did he do? Raped. Rape.
No, he held some people hostage, didn't he? He held Sally hostage. We saw for a bit.
Oh yeah.
He wasn't interested in the girls. Yeah,
and the police were there.
No, he holds her hostage for a bit in New Year, and then he comes back again, like in April, and does it all over again. But yeah, that all got a bit dark and grimy. I didn't particularly like that. It makes me hope that they don't go down the same route with Fizz and have a whole string of boyfriends now that.
Yeah.
Because we were definitely on Sally's side for the beginning of the affair, but then by the end of the night it's like you're both as bad as each other, really, Sally and Kevin.
Yeah.
And it was a shame because they were a really great couple up until that point. Maybe they were a bit boring, I don't know.
One thing we didn't talk about, we kind of alluded to it, but we didn't really go into it, was Toya's brush with almost being molested when she went to London and she knocked on the door of a guy she thought was her dad, and it turned out he was actually just a lucky paedophile who managed to convince her that he was her dad.
Yeah.
And she stayed over and he was just perving over her, and then he kidnapped her when he realised that she had worked out that he wasn't really her dad, and took her to the forest, and then she had to run away and got chased around, and Toya, Les and Janice were desperately trying to find her and couldn't find her anywhere, and that was really dramatic and
yeah, that was cool.
Poignant.
The one thing I mentioned to you about Janice earlier, talk about iconic outfits. Obviously, this has been the birth of Hayley's red coat we've seen in these years.
Yeah.
But that pinky purpley zigzag top that Janice was wearing, I'd forgotten just how much she wore that. And I was like, oh yeah, she used to wear that all the time. That was quite funny. What else have we got? Oh, I'm just kind of scanning down the notes now, see if there's anything else that stands out. Right, other highlights for me, the bit with Reg Holdsworth wig was quite funny, talking about the old classic carry-on sort of humour that Reg encapsulated but was no longer had a place in Coronation Street in the late 90s. I did love it when he went to get his wig and everyone was making fun of him. Curly was saying he was looking very rugged, and then there was a silly scene where he has the wig hidden under the what's it called, the little flap in your car?
Wing...
What's it? Yeah, you know, where the
flap.
Mirror is. And then it ends up falling down on top of Maureen and they end up crashing. That was funny. What else did we have? Any other standouts for you? Oh, Alf getting his OBE at the palace.
Oh,
that was funny.
Yeah.
And Audrey
not going to keep her mouth shut.
Yeah,
about
because
it.
Audrey's mad at Don, isn't she, on the drive up there? Don's taking them in the taxi and Don gets fed up of them bickering, so he drops them off at the side of the road. But then he takes at Alf but leaves Audrey to get into this van with this truck driver woman and her dog, and Audrey gets there and it's too late, and she goes to the palace gates and she kind of grabs, there's this Asian tourist there, she grabs this binoculars round his neck, choking him, and watches as he's there getting his OBE with Betty as his mayoress. That was a good episode.
I was going to say, we mentioned all these separately, but the episode where Deirdre gets released from prison is also the same episode where Judy discovers that she's pregnant and baby Shannon dies. That all happened on the same episode.
There were a few episodes where lots of really great things happened together. There was the Betty's Hot Shot saga with the horse. That was all right. We had Tracy's wedding was a good one, where she marries Robert, where he's called Robbie, wasn't he?
That was dramatic because
I mean, we said that current Nick and 90s Nick don't feel like the same person, but Robert Preston in 1996 was even further apart and separated from Tristan Gemmel's Robert, wasn't he? He was another drip with curtains.
So he ends up disappearing on the morning of the wedding, and Ken and is it Deirdre goes with him. They spend most of the episode looking in dockyards, trying to find him
because his stag stuck him in one of those shipping containers.
As a joke, and then
Tracy's there going, no, it's alright, he's going to be there. She's there in a Doc Martens with her wedding dress, isn't she?
Tracy's actually right though. It does turn out to be fine, and he does end up just turning up out of nowhere.
Yeah, that was a good episode. That was also the first time that we saw Blanche since the 70s or whenever it was. Maggie Jones reprises the role, and she's been on and off for the following 3 years, and I think now she's back in 1999. She's back for the long haul, so we're just about to go into the classic Blanche era, basically, which I'm looking forward to seeing as we go through the 2000s. What else have we had? Anything else stand out for you?
Nothing particularly.
I think we've pretty much got there.
Spoken about this more than we've spoken about any other era, maybe, but more things seem to have happened.
Teresa the Turkey.
Classic.
That was a good one.
Over Christmas, that's when.
Oh, there's another good quote here from the Deirdre and John story where she goes up to his doorstep, and his wife is there and answers the door, and she's like, "Who are you?" This is on New Year's Eve 1997, and Deirdre says, "I'm the woman who doesn't exist, and you're the other woman who doesn't exist." That's a brilliant line.
Like,
yeah,
I don't get it.
And she kind of, Deirdre goes off into the night, because this is when she realises that John, who she knew worked as a tie salesman, and she kind of got over that, didn't she? She agrees to, because John spins her a lie
it wasn't
about.
It wasn't that he was a tie salesman. It's that he said he was a pilot, and he lied about it.
Yeah, so Deirdre says, but then he says, "Oh, I just did it because I wanted to save face or whatever." So Deirdre accepts him, but then at the end of the year, she realises that he's got a wife and kids, and brilliant stuff. Jackie Dobbs, we talked a bit about already.
Yeah, I mean, this was an era of like quite ambitious stories. A lot of
Vera
changes.
and Jack and the Rovers we've not talked much about.
I know that was because
nice.
You know, being the landlord and landlady of the Rovers was one of the biggest jobs on Coronation Street, and this was the sort of beloved. This was like if the Ogdens were in charge.
Yeah.
And I.
They were a bit rubbish,
make a massive impression on me as the in charge of the Rovers, to be honest.
No.
Because Alec was there.
Yeah, he ends up coming back, doesn't he? He's one of the characters that return.
In the background.
He's such a conniving, nasty piece of work, isn't he? Yeah. He tries to get the Rovers from under them, and we get to see that, was it Christmas '98 when Jack and Vera are holding fort in the upstairs in the Rovers because Alec's trying to kick them out because he's managed to swindle them out of the Rovers, basically. But then the street kind of rally round, and Spider and Emily deliver them Christmas dinner up a ladder or something. Yeah, and then that was the last we saw of Alex. He bogs off with Becky towards the end of that. But yeah, I enjoy Jack and Vera in the Rovers, but they felt like they belonged there more than some of the more recent Rovers landladies and landlords, like Stella, for example, and Toya and Peter. Yes, Jack and Vera are a bit hopeless because they just kind of, they've landed themselves in with this, this business opportunity where they'd just been, white blue collar workers for the whole of their lives.
So before then, it was Annie and Jack. Then it was Annie. Then it was.
Then it was Bet, and then it was Bet and Alec.
And then it was.
Then it was Bet again. Yeah. Then it was Jack and Vera.
See, to me, I feel as though, and then after that, who was it?
Natalie, who has actually made no impression whatsoever. I can't. After that, it starts snowballing. I think after that it was Mike and Dougie and Fred.
No, I honestly think that Jack and Vera was the beginning of let's slap someone in there for a story. To me, because Jack and Annie obviously were the originals. Bet felt like she earned it.
Yeah.
And then you suddenly get the novelty sort of cycle of who would the viewers like to see? Like, it became the reward of being a popular character or a way of making somebody popular.
True. That's true.
That's what that feels like to me. But who knows what anyone else would think.
Yeah, I enjoyed them there. That's about it, isn't it? I think. So I'm just looking at. Yeah, I think we've seen a couple of other characters that we've seen a little bit of, like we saw Candice in 1 or 2 episodes just recently. She's a bit of a cow. She is a bit of a cow, isn't she? I think they soften her for a little bit, so I'm looking forward to seeing more of her in 2000, as well as Sarah Lou Toots, the Tina O'Brien one. Dougie has arrived on the street, but we've not seen him yet, has he? Dougie Ferguson.
Good. I'm glad, because I don't know who you're talking about.
Dougie Ferguson, you know who Dougie Ferguson is. But we've also seen his son, haven't we? Tom Ferguson, who's another, he was working in the salon.
Oh, yes.
And he was like, he made no impression. This is the thing,
a lot of the people just look really samey to me. And
there was lots of samey hunks.
There's a parade of like dull people who have no real purpose.
Definitely. Do you remember that Sandy that came into the Rovers for about a week? That was when Jack and Alec wanted to have a sexy barmaid.
Barmaid?
A bar staff. So Vera employs this hunky blonde. Who else? Oh, someone else who's left that we haven't mentioned was Fiona. She just kind of disappeared. She was just a bit boring and then left, really, wasn't she? I think she was a bit of a victim of the McDonald's not so exciting second half to the 90s. And then she got involved with that. Alan McKenna came along, and he was, again, not very nice character, but I just wasn't interested in that. Denise left as well. She didn't have the best exit. That's about it. So I would say that I did quite enjoy this era. There were definitely periods in it where it slowed down, and I'm mostly thinking 96. But the Brian Parks main year, the 97 to early 98 period, was really exciting stuff, and I think that he gave Coronation Street the shot in the arm that it really needed, even if some of the consequences and the way that Corrie was cast for and the storylines were plotted and everything afterwards were never quite the same as they were beforehand. No, I enjoyed the period, and it was just fun being able to rewatch something that I watched when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, and thinking I kind of remember this and I don't remember this at all. Whereas you said it again, you definitely preferred some of the older eras, didn't you? But
this was not my most favourite.
But it was. Did you enjoy at least being able to, I mean, as always, see some famous scenes in context?
Yeah.
Like with with Curly and Raquel, and even like the trees of the turkey and everything, being able to know what the background was.
Yeah, it's that. Yeah.
And I suppose seeing whether we agreed with the fact that people were saying that Coronation Street was a very different place post 1997, it was interesting to experience that.
Yeah.
So I think we're after nearly 2.5 hours. We're pretty much done with this. Thank you everybody for listening. I hope you enjoyed our reminiscing of these past 5 years of Corrie that we have watched and enjoyed. Maybe it won't be too long before we're back for or so long before we're back with the first half of the 2000s, but we'll just have to see how it goes, and then we got up to 2010, then we're going to stop it. So, Gemma, any final words? Because I realise I've been waffling on these past few minutes.
Nope.
Gemma is done. We're gonna have our tea now and enjoy the rest of our evening. So thank you everybody for listening. Do get in touch with us at conversationstreet@gmail.com if you've got any memories from the second half of the 90s that you'd like to share. Thank you for listening, and we will be back next week. Ta-ra!
Bye!
The music for this episode came from podcastthemes.com.